Cedar Falls, Colorado, September 1892. The telegram that changed everything arrived on a Tuesday morning when the mountain air still held the bite of early frost. Kate Morrison pressed the yellow paper against her chest, feeling her heart hammer against her ribs as she read the words again. Grace taken by fever. Stop. Buried yesterday. Stop. Deepest sympathies. Stop. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Her sister was gone. Sweet, hopeful Grace, who'd spent months writing letters to Thomas Lawson, a cattle rancher she'd never met, but had fallen in love with through careful penmanship and shared dreams. Grace, who'd saved every penny from her seamstress work to buy a train ticket west. Grace, who died 3 days into her journey, alone in a Denver boarding house while Kate waited back in St. Louis for letters that would never come. Kate's fingers trembled as she pulled out the bundle of correspondence Grace had left behind. Dozens of letters from Tom Lawson, each one revealing more of his character, his loneliness, his genuine desire for partnership, rather than mere companionship. The last letter had contained a train ticket to Cedar Falls and a simple promise written in Tom's steady hand. I'll be waiting at the station with a wagon and hope enough for both of us. But Grace would never see that wagon. She'd never feel Colorado mountain air fill her lungs or discover if Tom's laugh matched the warmth in his letters. Kate stared out her boarding house window at the busy St. Louis streets, clutching her sister's ticket, and facing a choice that would haunt her forever. She could wire Tom the terrible news and let him mourn a woman he'd never met, but had grown to love through words alone. Or she could honor her sister's memory by becoming the woman Grace had died trying to be. The decision took less time than she expected. Kate Morrison had spent 26 years being the practical sister, the one who stayed behind while Grace chased dreams. Now she would chase one last dream for both of them, even if it meant living someone else's life. 3 weeks later, Kate stepped off the Rocky Mountain Railroad at Cedar Falls Station, wearing Grace's best traveling dress and carrying her sister's worn leather satchel. The September air was thinner here, sharp with the scent of pine and possibility. She'd rehearsed this moment countless times during the long journey west, practicing Grace's more delicate way of speaking, her tendency to tilt her head when listening, her habit of smoothing her skirts when nervous. The platform bustled with afternoon activity. Cowboys loaded supplies, families reunited with arriving relatives, and merchants haggled over freight costs. Kate scanned the crowd, looking for a man matching Tom's description. Tall, brown hair touched with early silver, kind eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. Grace had read those details aloud so many times they were burned into Kate's memory. She spotted him before he noticed her. Thomas Lawson stood beside a sturdy wagon, hat in hand, shifting his weight from foot to foot with the nervous energy of a man about to meet his future. He was exactly as Grace had described, but the photographs hadn't captured the gentleness in his posture, or the way he kept smoothing his hair like a schoolboy before a recital. Kate's chest tightened with guilt, and something deeper she couldn't name. This man had poured his heart into letters meant for her sister. He'd shared his fears about running the ranch alone after his father's death, his dreams of building something lasting, his quiet confession that he sometimes talked to his horses just to hear another voice. Grace had treasured every revelation, but now Kate carried those intimacies like stolen jewels. Tom's eyes found hers across the platform, and his face transformed. The nervous tension melted into pure joy as he strode toward her, his smile broad and genuine. Kate's heart lurched. In that moment she nearly confessed everything, nearly admitted she wasn't Grace, that the woman he'd been writing to was buried in a Denver cemetery, that this entire meeting was built on deception and desperation. Instead she smiled back and let him take her hands in his work-roughened ones. "Grace," he said softly, like her name was a prayer, "you're even prettier than your photograph." Kate had practiced Grace's voice, but hearing her sister's name spoken with such tenderness nearly undid her. "Hello, Tom," she managed, hoping he couldn't hear the tremor in her words. He stepped back to study her properly, and Kate held her breath. Would he notice the subtle differences? Grace had been softer, rounder, with eyes that crinkled more easily into laughter. Kate was leaner from years of harder work, her hands more collused, her demeanor more guarded. But Tom saw only what he'd hoped to see, a woman who'd traveled across half the country to build a life with him. The journey wasn't too difficult, he asked, lifting her satchel with the same care he might handle something precious. Kate thought of Grace's actual journey, ending in fever and loneliness. It had its challenges, she said carefully. Tom nodded, understanding more than she'd revealed. Well, you're here now, that's what matters. He gestured toward his wagon. I thought we'd stop by Mrs. Whitman's boarding house first so you can rest and freshen up. Then if you're not too tired, I'd like to show you the ranch, show you what we'll be building together. The word "we" hit Kate like a physical blow. There was no we. There was only a grieving sister playing a dangerous game with a good man's heart. But she followed him to the wagon anyway, accepting his help up to the seat with Grace's practiced grace. The ride through Cedar Falls revealed a town caught between wilderness and civilization. The main street boasted a general store, a church, a saloon, and several other businesses, but beyond the town limits stretched endless rolling prairie, broken by stands of pine and aspen. Mountains loomed in the distance, their peaks already touched with snow despite the warm afternoon. It's beautiful, Kate said, and meant it. She'd never seen country so vast and open. St. Louis had felt cramped and gray compared to this endless sky. Wait until you see the ranch, Tom said, pride warming his voice. My father chose the location for the water rights. Willow Creek runs right through the property, never runs dry even in the worst summers. The house needs work, he added quickly, as if worried she might be disappointed. I've been fixing it up room by room, but I wanted to wait for your input on the kitchen and parlor. Kate's throat tightened again. He'd been preparing a home for Grace, saving decisions for the woman he thought he'd marry. Every kindness felt like a knife twist of guilt. Mrs. Pearl Whitman's boarding house sat at the edge of town, a tidy two-story building with flower boxes beneath every window. Pearl herself proved to be a woman in her 60s with shrewd eyes, and a no-nonsense manner that reminded Kate painfully of Grace's landlady back in St. Louis. So you're Thomas's intended, Pearl said, looking Kate up and down with frank assessment. He's been talking about nothing else for weeks. Good man Thomas Lawson, lost his parents too young and had to grow up fast, but he's got a solid head on his shoulders. Kate smiled and nodded, playing the part of the blushing bride-to-be. Pearl showed her to a small but comfortable room on the second floor, explaining that Tom had arranged for her to stay there until the wedding, which was planned for the following Saturday. 6 days to maintain this deception before committing the ultimate lie at the altar. Kate's hands shook as she unpacked Grace's few belongings, each item a reminder of the sister she'd lost, and the man she was betraying. That evening, Tom called for her as promised, and they rode out to his ranch in the golden light of sunset. The Lawson property sprawled across several thousand acres of prime grazing land, with the promised creek meandering through stands of cottonwood and willow. The house sat on a gentle rise, a modest but well-built structure of logs and stone, with a wide front porch that caught the evening breeze. It's not fancy, Tom said as he helped her down from the wagon, but it's solid, built to last. Kate walked slowly around the house, seeing it through Grace's eyes. Her sister would have loved the view of the mountains, the sound of water running over stones, the sense of space and possibility. Grace had grown up in cramped city apartments, dreaming of a place where she could keep chickens and plant a garden and watch storms roll. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Across an open sky. The kitchen needs new cabinets, Tom was saying, leading her inside. And I thought we might expand the parlor, add some built-in shelves for books. Grace mentioned in her letters that you love to read. Grace had loved to read. Kate preferred more practical pursuits, but she nodded anyway. The house was indeed modest but well-maintained, with sturdy furniture and clean windows that framed spectacular views. Tom had clearly worked hard to make it ready for a wife, adding feminine touches like curtains in the parlor, and wild flowers in a mason jar on the kitchen table. What do you think? He asked, and Kate heard the vulnerability beneath his casual tone. She turned to face him fully for the first time since arriving. In the soft light filtering through the kitchen windows, She could see why Grace had fallen for this man through letters alone. His eyes held intelligence and kindness in equal measure, and when he smiled, lines crinkled at the corners that spoke of someone who laughed easily despite the hardships he'd faced. "It's perfect," she said, and for a dangerous moment, meant it. They spent the next hour walking the property as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. Tom pointed out the barn he'd built himself, the pastures where his cattle grazed, the spot where he planned to build a larger house someday when their family grew. He spoke of the future with such certainty, such joy, that Kate felt her deception settling around her like quicksand. Each moment made it harder to tell the truth and easier to sink deeper into the lie. When they returned to town, Tom walked her to the boarding house steps and paused, hat in hand once again. "Grace," he said carefully, "I hope this isn't too forward, but I have to tell you, these past months of letters have meant more to me than I know how to express. I've been alone on that ranch for 3 years since my father died, and I'd started to think maybe I was meant to stay that way. Then your first letter arrived, and everything changed." Kate's heart hammered against her ribs. She knew exactly which letter he meant. Grace had shown it to her a dozen times, the carefully crafted introduction that had begun this entire correspondence. Grace had agonized over every word, wanting to present herself honestly, while still maintaining the mystery that made courtship exciting. "I know we're still getting to know each other in person," Tom continued, "but I want you to know that my feelings are real. What I've written in my letters, what I've shared with you, it all comes from the heart." The kindness in his voice nearly broke her resolve completely. This man deserved the truth. He deserved better than a woman built on lies and desperation. But looking at his hopeful face, Kate couldn't bring herself to destroy the dream Grace had died chasing. "Mine are real too," she whispered, and realized with a shock that she wasn't entirely lying anymore. Tom's smile could have powered the whole town. He took her hand briefly, squeezed it gently, then stepped back like a proper gentleman. "I'll call for you tomorrow evening," he said. "Ruth Caldwell at the trading post has been eager to meet you, and I thought we might attend the church social on Friday if you're feeling up to it." Kate nodded, already dreading the increased scrutiny that would come from meeting more people who might notice discrepancies between her and the Grace they'd heard described in Tom's letters. But there was no backing out now. She'd made her choice on that Tuesday morning in St. Louis, and now she had to live with the consequences. After Tom left, Kate climbed the stairs to her room and sat on the narrow bed, holding one of Grace's letters to the lamplight. Her sister's handwriting flowed across the page in graceful loops, describing her dreams of a life lived under big skies, with a man who valued her thoughts as much as her domestic skills. Grace had found that man, or thought she had. Now Kate would have to become worthy of him, even if it meant living someone else's life forever. The next morning brought visitors Kate hadn't expected. She was finishing breakfast in Pearl's dining room when the front door chimed, and voices carried from the entryway. Pearl appeared moments later with a small, energetic woman, whose dark hair was streaked with premature silver. "Grace, I'd like you to meet Ruth Caldwell," Pearl said. "She owns the trading post and has been pestering me since yesterday to bring her by for an introduction." Ruth Caldwell had intelligent eyes, and a firm handshake that spoke of someone unaccustomed to feminine frailty. "So you're the famous Grace Morrison," she said with a smile that held more curiosity than warmth. "Tom's been singing your praises for months. I've been curious to meet the woman who finally captured his heart." Kate felt immediately off balance. Something in Ruth's tone suggested more than casual interest. "It's nice to meet you too," she said carefully. "Ruth runs the most successful business in town," Pearl explained. "She took over the trading post from her late husband 5 years ago, and has doubled the profits since. A woman has to be practical about survival out here," Ruth said, studying Kate with sharp eyes. "Speaking of which, I noticed you didn't bring much luggage yesterday. Most women moving permanently west tend to pack their entire lives into trunks." Kate's pulse quickened. This was exactly the kind of scrutiny she'd feared. "I prefer to travel light," she said. "I thought it would be easier to buy what I needed once I settled." "Sensible," Ruth agreed. but something in her expression suggested the answer hadn't entirely satisfied her. Tom mentioned you're a seamstress by trade. We could certainly use someone with those skills in Cedar Falls. The nearest dressmaker is in Denver, which makes shopping for anything finer than work clothes quite challenging. I'd be happy to help, Kate replied, grateful for safer ground. She had learned basic sewing skills by necessity, though nothing approaching Grace's professional expertise. Wonderful. Perhaps you could stop by the store later this week. I have some fabric that's been sitting on the shelves for months because no one here has the skill to work with it properly. After Ruth left, Pearl lingered in the dining room, refilling Kate's coffee cup with the air of someone preparing for conversation. Ruth's a good woman, she said carefully, but she can be protective of the people she cares about. Tom's been like a younger brother to her since her husband died. She wants to make sure any woman he marries will be good to him. The warning was gentle but clear. Kate nodded her understanding, while inwardly cursing the complications that came with small-town relationships. In St. Louis, she could have maintained anonymity. Here everyone knew everyone, and her deception would require constant vigilance. That afternoon, she walked through town alone, ostensibly to familiarize herself with Cedar Falls, but really to calm her nerves before evening brought another performance. The town proved smaller than she'd initially thought, with perhaps 200 residents total. The kind of place where newcomers were noticed and discussed, where everyone knew their neighbor's business whether they wanted to or not. She paused outside St. Mary's Chapel, a modest building with a bell tower that rose above the surrounding shops. Through the open doors she could see someone moving around inside, preparing for what looked like a meeting or service. The sight of the altar reminded her uncomfortably of Saturday's approaching ceremony. In 5 days she would stand before God and this community, and promise to love and honor Thomas Lawson until death, all while wearing her dead sister's name like a stolen dress. Admiring our little church, Kate turned to find a man in his 50s approaching, collar marking him as the pastor. He had kind eyes and graying hair, with the patient demeanor of someone accustomed to listening to confessions and offering comfort. Yes, Kate managed. It's lovely. Pastor William Hayes, he said, extending his hand. You must be Miss Morrison. Tom's spoken of you often. I'm looking forward to performing Saturday's ceremony. Kate's stomach dropped. Saturday felt simultaneously too far away and dangerously close. Thank you, Pastor Hayes. I'm grateful for your willingness to marry us on such short notice. Tom's been a faithful member of this congregation since he was a boy, the pastor said warmly. It's my pleasure to see him find happiness, though I admit I'm curious about the rush. When he first approached me about the wedding, I suggested a longer engagement period to allow you both time to adjust to being together in person, rather than just through correspondence. Kate's mouth went dry. And what did he say? Pastor Hayes smiled. He said he'd waited long enough for the right woman, and saw no point in waiting longer once she arrived. I admire that kind of certainty, though I hope you feel the same confidence about the decision. The question hung in the air between them, and Kate realized this gentle man was offering her a chance to voice doubts if she had them. If only he knew the magnitude of her deception. I do, she said, hating herself for the lie. Good. Marriage is challenging enough without uncertainty. I'll see you both at tomorrow evening's social, I assume. The whole town's eager to welcome you properly. After the pastor left, Kate remained standing outside the church, feeling the weight of accumulated lies pressing down on her shoulders. Tomorrow's social would be another test, more people to fool, more chances for her deception to unravel. But beyond that lay Saturday's wedding, after which there would be no going back. She would legally become Grace Morrison Lawson, committed to a life built on foundations of grief and desperation. The sun was beginning to set when Tom arrived, to escort her back to the boarding house after their second tour of the ranch. This time, he'd brought a picnic supper, and they ate beside Willow Creek while the last light painted the mountains purple and gold. The setting was so perfectly romantic that Kate found herself forgetting, for moments at a time, that she was playing a role. Tell me about your family, Tom said as they sat on a fallen log, listening to water run over stones. Your letters mentioned a sister, but you've never said much about your parents. Kate's heart lurched. Grace's letters had mentioned her, the practical older sister who worried too much and dreamed too little. Now she had to discuss herself as if she were someone else entirely. Kate was always the strong one, she said carefully. After our parents died, she made sure I had everything I needed. She worked extra jobs so I could learn proper sewing skills instead of taking factory work. It was true mostly. Kate had sacrificed to give Grace opportunities she'd never had herself. But hearing it described from Grace's perspective made her throat tight with emotion. She sounds like a remarkable woman, Tom said softly. It must have been hard to leave her behind. Kate stared at the creek watching moonlight dance on the moving water. She understood why I had to come, she whispered. She wanted me to be happy. Do you think she'd approve of me? The question was asked lightly, but Kate heard the real concern beneath it. Tom wanted to be worthy not just of Grace, but of the family she'd left behind. The irony was almost too much to bear. She would have loved you, Kate said, and meant it completely. Grace had loved him already, through letters and photographs and dreams of a future they would never share. Tom reached over and took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. I hope I get to meet her someday. Maybe after we're settled, she could come for a visit. I know it's not the same as having family close, but I'd like her to know she's welcome. Kate's vision blurred with tears she couldn't explain away. The kindness of this man, his genuine desire to welcome her fictional sister into their fictional life, made her deception feel like the cruelest betrayal imaginable. Grace would never visit because Grace was buried in Denver soil, and Kate was sitting here accepting love meant for a ghost. That's very thoughtful, she managed. They sat in comfortable silence after that, watching stars appear in the vast Colorado sky. Kate had never seen so many stars, living as she had in the smoke and gaslight of St. Louis. Out here, the darkness was alive with light, and the silence held depth rather than emptiness. Grace, Tom said eventually, I want you to know that if you're having second thoughts about Saturday, I'll understand. I know this is all happening fast, and maybe once you see the reality of life out here, it's not what you imagined from my letters. Kate turned to study his profile in the moonlight. His face was serious, giving her another chance to back out, to confess, to save them both from a marriage built on deception. Instead she found herself saying, Are you having second thoughts? He was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. I'm terrified, he admitted. Not of marrying you but of not being enough, of disappointing you. I've been alone so long I'm not sure I remember how to be part of a pair. His honesty was like a dagger to her heart. Here was a man brave enough to reveal his deepest fears to someone he barely knew, while she couldn't even tell him her real name. You won't disappoint me, she said, meaning it more than he could possibly know. Tom squeezed her hand and smiled, the expression transforming his entire face. Then Saturday it is. Saturday it was. Kate nodded and smiled back, sealing both their fates with a lie that felt increasingly like the most complicated truth she'd ever told. Friday evening arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that made every breath feel like a promise. Kate stood before the small mirror in her boarding house room, adjusting Grace's second-best dress, and trying to calm the flutter of nerves that had been building all day. The church social would be her first real test among the entire community, where she'd have to maintain her deception under the scrutiny of dozens of curious eyes. Pearl knocked softly, and entered without waiting for permission, carrying a small bouquet of late-blooming wildflowers. From Tom, she said with a knowing smile. He picked them himself this morning before heading out to check his cattle. That boy's been pacing the porch for the last hour, nervous as a cat in a thunderstorm. Kate accepted the flowers, inhaling their sweet fragrance while her heart twisted with guilt. Tom's thoughtfulness only made her deception feel more poisonous. Each kindness was another weight added to the burden she carried, another reason why the truth would devastate him when it inevitably came to light. You look lovely, dear,
Pearl continued, adjusting a curl that had escaped Kate's careful arrangement. Though you seem a bit pale. Wedding nerves, I suppose. Perfectly natural for a bride-to-be. If only it were that simple. Kate forced a smile and thanked Pearl for the flowers, then gathered her shawl and gloves for the short walk to the church. Tom waited at the bottom of the boarding house steps, hat in hand and wearing his best Sunday coat. The sight of him made her breath catch. In the golden light of the setting sun he looked every inch the hero from one of Grace's romantic novels. "You're beautiful," he said softly, offering his arm with the same careful courtesy he'd shown since her arrival. "Are you ready to meet the rest of Cedar Falls properly?" Kate nodded, not trusting her voice. As they walked the 3 blocks to St. Mary's Chapel, Tom pointed out details about their neighbors' homes and shared stories about the people they'd soon encounter. His obvious pride in his community and genuine affection for its residents made Kate's chest ache with longing. She'd never belonged anywhere the way Tom belonged here, never had roots that ran deeper than necessity and survival. The church hall buzzed with conversation and laughter when they arrived. Long tables laden with covered dishes stretched along one wall, while clusters of people in their finest clothes filled the space with warmth and fellowship. Kate's entrance on Tom's arm created a subtle ripple of attention, conversations pausing as curious eyes assessed the woman who'd captured their most eligible bachelor's heart. Pastor Hayes approached them first, his wife Margaret beside him carrying a plate of what looked like her famous apple cake. Margaret proved to be a small, energetic woman with graying hair and eyes that missed nothing. She embraced Kate with genuine warmth, welcoming her to Cedar Falls with the enthusiasm of someone who'd been eagerly anticipating this meeting. "Tom's told us so much about you through his letters," Margaret said, linking her arm through Kate's as if they were old friends. "I hope you don't mind, but I took the liberty of organizing a small quilting circle for next Thursday. Some of the other ladies are eager to get to know you properly, and we thought it might help you feel more at home." Kate's stomach clenched. A quilting circle meant close quarters with the town's sharpest observers, hours of conversation where any slip could expose her deception, but refusing would seem ungrateful and antisocial. "That sounds wonderful," she managed. Ruth Caldwell materialized beside them with the silent efficiency Kate was beginning to recognize as her trademark. Tonight she wore a deep blue dress that complemented her silver-streaked hair, and her
sharp eyes held the same assessing quality Kate remembered from their first meeting. "Grace, I'm so glad you decided to join us tonight. I was hoping we could continue our conversation about your sewing skills." Before Kate could respond, a commotion near the door drew everyone's attention. A man in his 30s pushed through the crowd with the swagger of someone accustomed to being the center of attention. He was handsome in a rough way, with dark hair and eyes that held more boldness than kindness. Kate noticed several women step aside to let him pass, their expressions ranging from admiration to wariness. "Billy Crane," Tom muttered under his breath, his arm tightening protectively around Kate's waist. "I was hoping he'd stay away tonight." Pastor Hayes moved to intercept the newcomer with the practiced diplomacy of a man accustomed to managing difficult personalities. "Billy," he said with forced warmth, "good to see you. I trust you'll remember this is a church function." Billy's grin was all teeth and no warmth. "Of course, Pastor. I'm just here to welcome Cedar Falls' newest resident." His gaze fixed on Kate with an intensity that made her skin crawl. "You must be the famous mail-order bride I've been hearing about." The crude description sent a murmur through the nearby crowd. Tom stepped forward, his jaw tight with controlled anger. "Her name is Grace Morrison, soon to be Grace Lawson. I'd appreciate you showing her the respect she deserves." "Easy, Tom," Billy said, hands raised in mock surrender. "No offense intended. I'm just curious about the woman who managed to hook our most confirmed bachelor through nothing but letters. Must be quite a correspondent." Kate felt heat creep up her neck at the implication in Billy's words. Around them, conversations had grown quieter as people strained to hear the exchange. This was exactly the kind of attention she'd hoped to avoid, the scrutiny that could unravel her carefully constructed identity. "Grace's writing speaks for itself," Tom said firmly, "as does her character, which is more than I can say for everyone here." The insult landed with surgical precision, and Billy's easy smile faltered for just a moment before returning with renewed intensity. "Of course it does. I'm sure you've gotten to know each other real well in the few days since she arrived." The suggestion in his tone was unmistakable, and Kate watched Tom's hands clench into fists at his sides. Pastor Hayes stepped between them before the situation could escalate further, but the damage was done. A cloud of tension had settled over the gathering, and Kate could feel curious gazes weighing her from every direction. Margaret Hayes proved to be a master of social salvage, smoothly guiding Kate away from the confrontation and toward a group of women clustered around the dessert table. "Don't mind Billy," she said quietly. "He's been drinking, and he's always been jealous of Tom's success with the ranch. Some men can't stand to see others find happiness." The women Margaret introduced were a mix of wives and spinsters, ranging from young newlyweds to weathered matrons who'd survived decades of frontier life. They welcomed Kate with varying degrees of warmth, their questions carefully polite but probing. Where had she learned to sew so beautifully? What had convinced her to leave everything familiar for an uncertain future? Did she find ranch life very different from city living? Kate answered as carefully as she could, drawing on Grace's letters and her own imagination to paint a picture of the woman she was supposed to be. With each response she felt herself sinking deeper into the deception, creating details that would have to be remembered and maintained indefinitely. Grace had been raised by a seamstress aunt after their parents died. Grace preferred tea to coffee, and had a weakness for romantic poetry. Grace had always dreamed of wide-open spaces and the chance to build something lasting with a good man. Some of these details were true, pulled from Kate's memories of her sister. Others were fabrications designed to match what Tom's letters had revealed about his expectations and desires. The line between truth and fiction blurred until Kate wasn't sure which was which anymore. As the evening progressed, she found herself genuinely enjoying the company of several women. Sarah Thompson, a young mother with twin boys, shared stories about the challenges of raising children on an isolated ranch. Mary Patterson, the elderly quilter whose grandson Kate had helped with his arithmetic, offered practical advice about preserving vegetables for the harsh mountain winters. These women faced the same struggles Grace would have confronted, the same daily battles against isolation and hardship that defined frontier life. For the first time since arriving in Cedar Falls, Kate began to understand what had drawn Grace to this life. It wasn't just Tom's letters or the promise of marriage. It was the sense of community, the way these people supported each other through difficulties that would crush anyone facing them alone. Grace had been seeking more than a husband. She'd been seeking a place to belong. The realization made Kate's deception feel both more justified and more terrible. Grace deserved this community, these friendships, this chance at happiness. But Grace was gone, and Kate was stealing a life that had never been meant for her. The dancing began after supper, with Pastor Hayes calling the steps while his wife played a battered upright piano. Kate found herself swept into the familiar patterns of country dances she'd learned at social gatherings back in St. Louis. Tom proved to be a capable partner, his natural coordination and obvious comfort with the community making up for any lack of formal training. As they moved through the figures of a Virginia reel, Kate caught glimpses of Billy Crane watching them with an expression she couldn't quite read. He'd been drinking steadily throughout the evening, his initial swagger giving way to something darker and more unpredictable. Several times she noticed other men trying to engage him in conversation, clearly attempting to keep him occupied and away from the dancing couples. During a brief rest between sets, Tom guided Kate outside for some fresh air. The September night was crisp and clear, with stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. They stood on the church steps, breathing in the pine-scented air, while the sounds of music and laughter drifted from inside. "I'm sorry about Billy's behavior earlier," Tom said, his voice tight with lingering anger. "He's been trouble since he came to town 6 months ago. Claims he's looking for work, but mostly he seems interested in causing problems for anyone who has what he wants." Kate studied Tom's profile in the moonlight, noting the tension in his jaw and the way his hands remained clenched even now. What does he want? Land mostly. The respect that comes with being established somewhere. Billy's the kind of man who thinks he can take shortcuts to get what others have earned through hard work. He's made offers on several properties around town, always for less than they're worth and always with the suggestion that refusing might not be wise. The implication sent a chill through Kate that had nothing to do with the mountain air. Has he made offers on your ranch? Tom's laugh held no humor. Twice. Both times I told him it wasn't for sale at any price. The second time he suggested I might change my mind if circumstances changed. I made it clear that wouldn't be happening. Before Kate could respond, the church door opened behind them and Billy Crane stepped out, swaying slightly from the evening's drinking. His earlier swagger had been replaced by something more dangerous, a recklessness that made Kate instinctively step closer to Tom's side. Well, Billy said, his words slightly slurred, the happy couple taking some air. Hope I'm not interrupting anything private. Tom moved protectively in front of Kate, his body language screaming warning. You should go home, Billy. Sleep off whatever you've been drinking. Now that's not very neighborly, Billy replied, his grin sharp and predatory. I was just thinking we should get better acquainted. Your bride and I, after all, we're going to be neighbors for a long time. The threat was subtle but unmistakable, and Kate felt her heart begin to race. This was the kind of man who enjoyed having power over others, who would use any weakness he discovered to his advantage. If he suspected her deception, he could destroy everything she'd tried to build. The lady's not interested in your acquaintance, Tom said firmly. And neither am I. Find someone else to bother. Billy's eyes flicked between them, calculating and cold. Interesting how protective you are of a woman you barely know. Makes a man wonder what you're protecting her from. The words hit closer to home than Billy could have realized, and Kate saw Tom stiffen with renewed anger. Before either man could escalate the confrontation further, the church door opened again, and Pastor Hayes emerged with two other men, Kate recognized as members of the town council. Billy, the pastor said with quiet authority, I think it's time you headed home. John and Robert here would be happy to make sure you get there safely. The presence of witnesses diffused the immediate tension, but Billy's parting look promised this wasn't over. See you around, Grace, he said, her name dripping with insinuation. I'm looking forward to getting to know you much better. After he left with his reluctant escorts, Tom and Kate remained on the church steps in silence. The evening's warmth had been thoroughly poisoned by Billy's presence, and Kate couldn't shake the feeling that she'd made a dangerous enemy without understanding why. I should get you back to Mrs. Whitman's, Tom said finally. It's getting late, and tomorrow's going to be a long day. Tomorrow, their wedding day. Kate had managed to push the approaching ceremony to the back of her mind during the social, but now it loomed before her like a precipice. In less than 12 hours, she would stand before this community, and take vows that would legally bind her to Tom Lawson for the rest of her life. The magnitude of what she was about to do made her hands shake as Tom helped her down the church steps. The walk back to the boarding house was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts. Kate's mind raced with all the ways her deception could unravel, all the people who might notice inconsistencies between her behavior and the Grace they'd expected to meet. Billy Crane's suspicious attention was just the beginning. Ruth Caldwell's sharp eyes missed nothing. The quilting circle would provide hours of intimate conversation where any slip could prove fatal. At the boarding house steps, Tom paused and turned to face her fully. In the lamplight from Pearl's front windows, his expression was serious and thoughtful. Grace, he said carefully, I want you to know that whatever happens tomorrow, whatever challenges we face as a married couple, I'm committed to making this work. I know we're still getting to know each other, but I believe we can build something real and lasting together. His earnestness was like salt in an open wound. Here was a man offering her his complete devotion based on letters from a dead woman, and 3 days of careful performance. The guilt was overwhelming, but so was something else Kate wasn't ready to name. In Tom's presence she felt safer and more valued than she had in years. The life he was offering, the future he envisioned, called to something deep in her heart that had nothing to do with her sister's dreams. I want that too, she whispered, and realized with shocking clarity that she meant it. Tom's smile transformed his entire face, and for a moment Kate forgot about deception and danger and the approaching reckoning. He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell the starch in his shirt and the faint scent of the soap he used. His hand came up to cup her cheek with infinite gentleness. "May I kiss you?" he asked softly. Kate's breath caught. Grace's letters had been full of romantic longing, but this moment belonged entirely to Kate herself. The woman Tom was about to kiss wasn't the innocent seamstress from his imagination. She was a complex, flawed person carrying secrets that could destroy them both. But she was also a woman falling in love despite every reason she shouldn't be. "Yes," she breathed. Tom's kiss was everything Grace had dreamed it would be and nothing Kate had expected. Gentle but sure, sweet without being hesitant. It spoke of a man who understood that real intimacy came from connection rather than conquest. When they broke apart, Kate felt dizzy with more than just physical attraction. She felt the terrifying, exhilarating sensation of being truly seen and accepted, even if that acceptance was based on incomplete information. "Tomorrow," Tom said against her forehead, "I'll be the luckiest man in Colorado." Kate managed a smile and bid him good night, then climbed the stairs to her room on unsteady legs. Once inside, she sat heavily on the narrow bed and stared at her reflection in the small mirror. The woman looking back at her had flushed cheeks and bright eyes, the unmistakable look of a woman in love. But she also had shadows that spoke of secrets and guilt, complications that would follow her into marriage and beyond. Tomorrow she would become Grace Lawson in the eyes of God and the law. The question that haunted her as she prepared for bed was whether she could become Grace Lawson in her own heart, or if the weight of deception would eventually crush whatever happiness she managed to build. Outside her window, the mountains stood sentinel against the star-filled sky, as permanent and unchanging as the vows she would take in the morning. Kate pulled Grace's nightgown over her head and climbed into bed, but sleep was a long time coming. Her mind kept circling back to Billy Crane's calculating stare, Ruth Caldwell's probing questions, and the quilting circle that awaited her next week. Most of all, she thought about Tom's kiss and the way he'd looked at her when he called her beautiful. Grace deserved that look, that tenderness, that unwavering devotion. Grace had earned it through months of honest correspondence and genuine affection. Kate had stolen it through deception and desperation, and she was beginning to understand that some thefts carried a price higher than the thief could ever afford to pay. But it was too late to turn back now. Tomorrow she would marry Tom Lawson and hope that love built on lies could somehow transform into something real and lasting. The alternative was confession and devastation, the destruction of a good man's dreams and the end of her own chance at belonging somewhere. As Kate finally drifted toward sleep, her last conscious thought was a prayer to whatever powers might be listening. "Let this work," she pleaded silently. "Let me be worthy of the life I'm stealing. Let me find a way to deserve the love I'm accepting under false pretenses." Tomorrow would bring answers, for better or worse. Tomorrow she would discover whether Grace Morrison could truly become Grace Lawson, or whether Kate Morrison would be trapped forever in a life that didn't belong to her. The mountain wind whispered through the pine trees outside her window, carrying the promise of change and the threat of consequences. Kate pulled the quilt over her head and tried to silence the voice in her mind that whispered she was making the biggest mistake of her life. Tomorrow was her wedding day. Tomorrow would change everything, one way or another. Dawn broke gray and cold over the Colorado mountains, matching the storm clouds gathering in Kate's chest as she stared at her reflection in the boarding house mirror. Her wedding dress hung from a hook on the door, Grace's finest creation made from ivory silk that had cost a month's wages. Every delicate stitch represented hours of her sister's careful work, dreams sewn into fabric with threads of hope and anticipation. The dress fit perfectly, of course. Grace had made it to her own measurements, never imagining another woman would wear it to marry the man she'd fallen in love with through letters. Kate's hands trembled as she touched the pearl buttons Grace had saved for months to afford. Each one felt like an accusation, a reminder that she was about to commit the ultimate betrayal in the most sacred setting possible. A soft knock interrupted her spiraling thoughts.
Pearl Whitman entered without waiting for permission, carrying a breakfast tray and wearing the satisfied expression of a woman who'd successfully orchestrated dozens of weddings over the years. "Big day, my dear," Pearl said cheerfully, setting the tray on the small table by the window. "I brought you some toast and tea. Can't have the bride fainting at the altar from an empty stomach." Kate's stomach churned at the mention of food, but she accepted the cup of tea gratefully. The warmth helped steady her hands, though nothing could calm the chaos in her mind. In 3 hours she would stand before Pastor Hayes and promise to love, honor and obey Thomas Lawson until death parted them. The words felt like blasphemy when she couldn't even tell him her real name. "You're nervous," Pearl observed, settling into the room's single chair with the ease of someone accustomed to managing bridal anxieties. "Perfectly natural, dear. Every woman has doubts on her wedding morning. The important thing is whether you love him." The question pierced Kate's heart like an arrow finding its mark. Did she love Tom, the man who'd shown her such gentleness and respect, who'd offered her a future built on partnership rather than possession, who looked at her like she was precious beyond measure, even though everything he knew about her was a lie? "I do," she whispered, and realized with crushing clarity that it was the most honest thing she'd said since arriving in Cedar Falls. Pearl's weathered face softened with understanding. "Then everything else will work itself out. Love has a way of smoothing over the rough places, given time and patience. If only it were that simple." Kate nibbled at the toast to appease Pearl's watchful concern while her mind raced through all the ways this marriage could collapse. Billy Crane's suspicious attention, Ruth Caldwell's sharp observations, the quilting circle where intimate conversation could reveal inconsistencies in her carefully constructed identity. Sooner or later, someone would notice something that didn't match the Grace they'd expected to meet. After Pearl left, Kate sat alone with her thoughts and the ivory dress that represented everything she was stealing. Grace had been so excited about this gown, spending evenings after work, adding tiny seed pearls to the bodice, and adjusting the hemline to accommodate dancing. She described every detail in letters to Tom, painting pictures of how beautiful their wedding would be. Now Kate would wear that dress to marry that man while Grace lay cold in Denver soil, her dreams buried with her. The injustice of it made Kate's chest tight with grief and guilt that threatened to suffocate her. She told herself she was honoring Grace's memory, completing the journey her sister had died attempting. But in the harsh light of dawn, her justifications felt as flimsy as tissue paper. She could still stop this. Even now she could pack Grace's belongings and catch the next eastbound train. She could write Tom a letter explaining everything, begging his forgiveness for the deception while setting him free to find someone worthy of his devotion. The thought of his face when he read such a confession made her physically ill. But it would be kinder than letting him discover the truth after they were legally bound. But where would she go? Back to St. Louis, where Grace's death had left her completely alone. To some other city, where she'd survive as a seamstress or factory worker, always wondering what might have been. The prospect of returning to that gray, lonely existence felt like a death sentence after glimpsing what life could be like with someone who cherished her. A commotion outside drew her to the window. Tom's wagon waited in front of the boarding house, decorated with ribbons and wildflowers that must have taken him hours to arrange. He stood beside it wearing his finest suit, speaking quietly with Frank Hartwell, who'd apparently volunteered to help with wedding preparations. Both men looked up at her window, and Tom's face lit with such pure joy that Kate's heart clenched painfully. He loved her. Not the real her perhaps, but the woman he thought she was. The Grace he'd courted through letters and welcomed with such tenderness. That love was real, even if its object was an illusion. Could something genuine grow from such twisted roots? Could she become the woman he deserved, even if she'd started as an imposter? Another knock interrupted her internal debate. This time it was Margaret Hayes, carrying a small bouquet of mountain laurel, and wearing the determined expression of a pastor's wife accustomed to managing wedding day crises. "How are you holding up, dear?" Margaret asked, her sharp eyes taking in Kate's pale complexion and trembling hands. Pre-wedding nerves are perfectly normal, but you look like you might faint. Kate forced a smile that felt more like a grimace. I'm fine, just excited. Margaret didn't look convinced, but she busied herself with helping Kate into the wedding dress, her efficient fingers managing the dozens of tiny buttons with practiced ease. As the silk settled around Kate's frame, she felt herself transforming into Grace Morrison one final time. After today, she would be Grace Lawson, bound by law and sacred vows to maintain this deception for the rest of her life. There, Margaret said, stepping back to admire her handiwork. You look absolutely radiant. Tom won't be able to take his eyes off you. Kate studied her reflection in the small mirror, hardly recognizing the woman looking back at her. The ivory silk transformed her angular frame into something ethereal and graceful. Grace's careful alterations had created a perfect fit that made the most of Kate's modest curve, while maintaining the modesty expected of a frontier bride. She looked like a woman worthy of Tom's devotion, even if she knew the truth beneath the beautiful facade. Margaret pinned the laurel bouquet to Kate's hair, with the reverence reserved for sacred rituals. My grandmother always said that mountain laurel brings protection and new beginnings to brides who wear it. Given everything you've sacrificed to be here, I thought it was appropriate. The kindness in Margaret's voice nearly broke Kate's composure completely. These people had welcomed her with such warmth, accepting her as one of their own based on nothing more than Tom's happiness and their own generous hearts. They deserved better than a woman built on lies and desperation. The walk to St. Mary's Chapel felt like a journey to her own execution. Kate moved through the crisp morning air on unsteady legs, accepting congratulations from neighbors who gathered to witness the ceremony. Children ran alongside the wedding party, laughing and calling out good wishes. Even the mountains seemed to approve, their peaks catching the morning light in a display of natural splendor that made the day feel blessed despite Kate's inner turmoil. The chapel itself had been transformed overnight into something magical. Wildflowers decorated every surface, filling the small space with color and fragrance. Candles flickered on the windowsills despite the morning hour, casting dancing shadows on the whitewashed walls. Someone had polished the simple wooden pews until they gleamed, and the altar held an arrangement of autumn leaves that spoke of harvest and abundance. Tom waited at the front of the church, his face radiant with happiness, as he watched Kate walk down the short aisle. Frank Hartwell stood beside him as best man, his weathered features creased in a smile that suggested he took genuine pleasure in his friend's joy. The sight of both men waiting for her with such warmth and acceptance made Kate's steps falter, but Margaret's gentle hand at her elbow kept her moving forward. The small congregation rose as Kate approached the altar, their faces reflecting the community's approval of this union. She recognized most of them from the previous evening's social. Ruth Caldwell, watching with those sharp assessing eyes. Sarah Thompson bouncing her baby to keep him quiet. Elderly Mary Patterson wiping away sentimental tears. Even some of the cowboys from surrounding ranches had cleaned up and come to town to witness their friend's wedding. Notably absent was Billy Crane, though Kate couldn't decide if his absence was a relief or a cause for additional worry. Men like Billy didn't simply disappear when they'd been publicly humiliated. They waited and plotted and struck when their targets were most vulnerable. Pastor Hayes stood before the altar in his finest robes, his kind face serious with the gravity of the moment. His wife had taken her place at the piano, ready to provide music for the ceremony. The morning light streaming through the chapel's modest stained glass windows painted rainbow patterns on the floor, as if heaven itself was blessing this union. Kate took her place beside Tom, acutely aware of his height and strength. The way he seemed to radiate calm confidence even in this moment of supreme vulnerability. When he smiled at her, she felt her heart skip in a way that had nothing to do with nerves and everything to do with the dangerous territory of genuine affection. "Dearly beloved," Pastor Hayes began, his voice carrying easily through the small space, We are gathered here today to witness the union of Thomas Michael Lawson and Grace Elizabeth Morrison in holy matrimony. Grace Elizabeth Morrison, her sister's full name spoken aloud in this sacred context, made Kate feel like she was witnessing her own funeral. Grace should be standing here in this dress, speaking these vows, beginning this life. Instead, she was buried in unfamiliar soil while Kate wore her identity like a stolen coat. The pastor continued with the traditional
opening, speaking about the sacred nature of marriage and the commitment required to build a life together. His words about honesty and faithfulness in all things made Kate's palms sweat inside her gloves. Every phrase seemed designed to highlight the magnitude of her deception. Marriage is not to be entered into lightly, Pastor Hayes intoned, but reverently, deliberately, and in accordance with the purposes for which it was instituted by God. Kate's vision blurred slightly as the full weight of what she was doing crashed over her. She was about to take sacred vows based on lies, bind herself to a man who didn't even know her real name. The enormity of the deception made her sway slightly on her feet. Tom noticed immediately, his hand moving to steady her elbow with gentle concern. "Are you all right?" he whispered, his voice too low for the congregation to hear. Kate nodded, not trusting her voice, and forced herself to focus on his face instead of Pastor Hayes' words. Tom's eyes held such tenderness, such complete devotion, that she felt her resolve wavering between confession and commitment. He deserved to know the truth, but he also deserved the happiness he'd found in loving who he thought she was. If any person has just cause why these two should not be joined in marriage, Pastor Hayes announced, let them speak now or forever hold their peace. The silence that followed felt eternal. Kate held her breath, half expecting Billy Crane to burst through the chapel doors with accusations and evidence of her deception. When nothing happened, she felt some of the tension leave her shoulders, though her hands continued to tremble inside her gloves. "Thomas," Pastor Hayes continued, turning to the groom, "do you take Grace Elizabeth Morrison to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do you part?" Tom's voice rang out clear and strong, without a moment's hesitation. "I do." The certainty in his tone made Kate's heart ache with longing and guilt in equal measure. He meant every word of those vows would honor them with his life. She was accepting a promise she could never fully return, taking devotion offered to someone else entirely. Now it was her turn. Pastor Hayes faced her with the same solemn dignity, his kind eyes holding no trace of suspicion or doubt. To him she was simply Grace Morrison, a seamstress from St. Louis, who'd found love through correspondence and courage enough to build a new life in the Colorado Territory. "Grace Elizabeth Morrison," he began, and Kate felt the name settle around her like a shroud. "Do you take Thomas Michael Lawson to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do you part?" This was the moment of no return. Once she spoke those words, she would be legally bound to Tom Lawson, committed to a lifetime of maintaining this deception. The chapel fell silent around her, everyone waiting for her response. Tom's eyes held such hope, such complete trust in her answer. Kate opened her mouth and found her voice barely a whisper. "I do." The words felt like both salvation and damnation. She'd committed herself to Tom, but also to a life built on the foundation of her sister's death. Pastor Hayes smiled with satisfaction and moved toward the ritual's conclusion. "The rings, please," he requested. Frank Hartwell stepped forward with two simple gold bands that Tom must have purchased from the jeweler in Denver. They weren't elaborate, but they caught the morning light streaming through the stained glass and seemed to glow with their own inner fire. Tom took Kate's trembling hand in his steady one and slipped the smaller band onto her finger with infinite care. "With this ring," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I thee wed." Kate accepted the larger band with hands that shook despite her best efforts at control. Tom's finger was broad and work-rovined, scarred from years of ranch labor, but when she slipped the ring into place, it seemed to fit as if it had always belonged there. "With this ring," she whispered, "I thee wed." Pastor Hayes raised his hands in blessing, his face radiant with the joy of uniting two souls in holy matrimony. By the power vested in me by God, and the territory of Colorado, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Thomas, you may kiss your bride. Tom's hands came up to frame Kate's face with the same gentle reverence he'd shown the night before. When his lips met hers, the kiss was soft and sweet and full of promises for their future together. Around them the congregation erupted in applause and cheers, but Kate heard none of it. In that moment, there was only Tom's warmth and the terrifying realization that her feelings for him were becoming more real than anything else in her carefully constructed identity. When they broke apart, Tom's smile was brilliant enough to power the entire chapel. "Hello, Mrs. Lawson," he said softly, testing out her new name with obvious pleasure. Mrs. Lawson, Grace Lawson. The name felt foreign on her tongue, but somehow right in her heart. Kate smiled back, pushing aside her guilt long enough to bask in the joy of this moment. Whatever came next, whatever consequences awaited her deception, right now she was married to a good man who cherished her, surrounded by a community that had welcomed her with open arms. The recessional passed in a blur of congratulations and well wishes. Margaret Hayes pressed a small cloth bag into Kate's hands, whispering that it contained rice for good luck. Sarah Thompson managed to kiss her cheek despite the squirming baby in her arms. Even Ruth Caldwell offered what seemed like genuine congratulations, though her sharp eyes continued to study Kate with that unsettling intensity. Outside the chapel, the autumn air felt crisp and clean, full of possibilities and new beginnings. Tom helped Kate into the decorated wagon while the wedding guests gathered around to send them off properly. Someone had tied tin cans to the back of the wagon that would rattle all the way to the ranch, announcing their newly married status to anyone within hearing distance. As they drove through Cedar Falls toward their new life together, Kate caught sight of a familiar figure standing in the shadows between two buildings. Billy Crane watched their departure with an expression that made her blood run cold. Even from a distance, she could see the calculation in his posture, the predatory patience of a man waiting for the right moment to strike. Tom followed her gaze and his jaw tightened when he spotted Billy. "Don't worry about him," he said firmly, his arm tightening protectively around Kate's waist. "Whatever he's planning, we'll handle it together." Together, the word should have been comforting, but Kate knew that Billy's threat was only the beginning. There would be other tests of her deception, other moments when the truth threatened to surface and destroy everything she'd built. The quilting circle next Thursday. Future social gatherings where someone might notice inconsistencies in her stories. Letters that might arrive addressed to the real Grace Morrison, whose death was known in Denver but not yet in Cedar Falls. But for now, she was Grace Lawson, married to a man who loved her and driving toward a ranch that would be her home. The mountains rose around them like protective sentinels, and the afternoon sun painted the autumn landscape in shades of gold and amber. Whatever dangers lay ahead, she would face them with Tom beside her. Whatever the cost of her deception, she would find a way to make herself worthy of the love she'd accepted under false pretenses. The tin cans rattled cheerfully behind them as they left Cedar Falls behind and headed toward their future together. Kate's wedding ring caught the light as she adjusted her gloves, a constant reminder of the vows she'd taken, and the life she'd committed to building. She was Grace Lawson now, for better or worse, and she would do everything in her power to make sure it was for better. The ranch house came into view as they crested the final hill, looking exactly as it had during her previous visits but somehow different now that it was officially home. Tom had strung additional lanterns along the porch and arranged more wildflowers around the front steps, his own version of a wedding decoration. The sight of his efforts to make this day special despite their simple circumstances brought tears to Kate's eyes. "Welcome home, Mrs. Lawson," Tom said as he helped her down from the wagon, his voice full of pride and promise. Home. Kate looked around at the rolling pastures, the creek flowing clear and steady, the mountains standing guard over their small piece of paradise. For the first time since Grace's death, she felt like she might actually belong somewhere. The feeling was so powerful it nearly brought her to her knees. Whatever storms lay ahead, whatever prices she would have to pay for her deception, she was committed now. She was Grace Lawson, wife to Thomas, mistress of this ranch, member of the Cedar Falls community. The woman who had been Kate Morrison was buried as surely as her sister, and from her ashes had risen someone new, someone who was determined to be worthy of the love and trust she'd been given, even if she'd obtained them through lies. Someone who would fight to protect this fragile happiness, no matter what it cost her. The afternoon sun painted everything in golden light as Tom carried her over the threshold of their home, and for just a moment, Kate allowed herself to believe that love really could conquer the sins of her desperate heart. The first weeks of marriage passed like a dream Kate was afraid to wake from. October painted the Colorado landscape in brilliant reds and golds, and the ranch settled into the rhythm of preparation for winter. Tom proved to be everything his letters had promised and more, treating Kate with a combination of tenderness and respect that made her heart ache with both love and guilt. Each morning brought new revelations about the man she'd married. He sang softly to himself while doing chores, old Irish ballads his mother had taught him before the fever took her. He saved the cream from their cow's milk for Kate's coffee without being asked, remembering her preference from casual conversation. When storms rattled the windows at night, he would pull her close and tell stories about the land's history until the wind died down and sleep came easy. But beneath the surface happiness, Kate felt the constant weight of her deception. Every loving gesture from Tom felt like both a gift and an accusation. When he spoke about their future children, about growing old together on this land, she had to excuse herself to compose her emotions. The life he described was everything Grace had dreamed of, everything Kate had never dared want for herself. The quilting circle proved to be both easier and more dangerous than she'd anticipated. The women of Cedar Falls welcomed her with genuine warmth, sharing stories and advice with the casual intimacy of longtime friends. Kate found herself drawn into discussions about preserving vegetables, treating winter ailments, and managing household budgets on isolated ranches. Margaret Hayes proved to be a natural leader among the women, guiding conversations with the same gentle authority her husband showed from the pulpit. Sarah Thompson brought her twins, who provided comic relief when the discussion grew too serious. Even Ruth Caldwell seemed to soften in this domestic setting, offering practical advice about dealing with difficult customers and managing business accounts. But it was during these intimate gatherings that Kate felt most vulnerable. When Mary Patterson asked about her sewing techniques, Kate had to carefully navigate between her limited skills and Grace's professional expertise. When Sarah inquired about childhood memories, Kate found herself mixing truth with fiction until she could barely remember which stories belonged to whom. "You're different than I expected," Ruth observed one Thursday afternoon as the circle worked on a wedding quilt for another young couple in town. Her needle moved with mechanical precision while her eyes studied Kate's face. "Tom's letters painted such a vivid picture of you, but you seem more reserved than he described." Kate's heart lurched, but she kept her stitches steady. "Letter writing makes a person bold," she said carefully. "Face-to-face conversation feels different." "True enough," Margaret agreed, though Kate noticed she was listening intently to the exchange. "Though I must say, you seem to be settling into married life beautifully." Tom hasn't stopped smiling since the wedding. The observation brought warmth to Kate's cheeks, because it was undeniably true. Tom did seem radiantly happy, and that happiness was becoming increasingly genuine on her part as well. Despite the circumstances that had brought them together, something real was growing between them. Something that felt too precious to risk with confessions and complications. November brought the first serious snow, and with it a test of their partnership that Kate hadn't anticipated. Tom fell ill with a fever that left him bedridden for nearly a week, delirious and helpless in a way that terrified them both. Kate found herself drawing on skills she'd learned caring for Grace during their parents' final illness, skills the real Grace had never possessed. She managed the cattle with help from Frank Hartwell, who rode over twice daily to check on them. She prepared the medicines Doc Mitchell prescribed, sitting up nights to monitor Tom's temperature and force broth between his cracked lips. When he woke on the 6th day, weak but clear-eyed, his first words were ones of gratitude that made her chest tight with emotion. "You saved my life," he whispered, reaching for her hand with fingers that trembled from weakness. Kate squeezed his hand gently,
overwhelmed by the realization that she would have done anything to keep him alive. Somewhere in the midst of deception and fear, love had taken root and grown into something that felt unshakable. "I couldn't lose you," she admitted, meaning it more than she'd ever meant anything. Tom's recovery brought a subtle shift in their relationship. The crisis had stripped away the polite courtesies of new marriage and revealed the depth of their commitment to each other. They worked together with an efficiency born of trust, Kate managing the household while Tom slowly regained his strength. In the evenings they sat by the fire and planned for spring, discussing which fields to plant, and whether to expand the cattle herd. It was during one of these quiet conversations that Tom brought up a subject Kate had been dreading. "I've been thinking," he said, whittling a piece of wood while she mended one of his shirts. "We should write to your sister Kate, let her know how well you're settling in, maybe invite her for a visit next summer." Kate's needle slipped, pricking her finger and drawing blood. She sucked on the wound to buy herself time while her mind raced. "I'm not sure that's possible," she said carefully. Tom looked up from his whittling, concern creasing his features. "Did something happen between you two? I know family relationships can be complicated." The opening was there, perfect for confession. She could tell him everything right now, explain about Grace's death and her own desperate decision to take her sister's place. But looking at his kind, trusting face, Kate found herself taking a different path entirely. "Kate died," she said quietly, the words torn from her throat like pieces of her soul. "Last month. The fever took her just days after I left St. Louis." The lie felt like blasphemy, killing herself in Tom's mind to protect the fiction of Grace. But it was also, in a strange way, true. Kate Morrison had died the day she stepped off that train in Cedar Falls. What remained was something new, something built from love and hope, and the desperate desire to be worthy of the life she'd claimed. Tom set aside his whittling immediately, and moved to kneel beside her chair, gathering her hands in his work-roughened ones. "Oh Grace, why didn't you tell me? You must be heartbroken." The genuine anguish in his voice nearly broke her completely. Here he was comforting her for the loss of herself while she maintained the deception that was poisoning everything between them. Kate allowed herself to cry then, tears that were real even if their supposed cause was fabricated. She was grieving, had been grieving since that terrible telegram arrived in St. Louis. Grieving for Grace, for the woman she used to be, for the honest life they might have had if circumstances had been different. Tom held her while she wept, stroking her hair and murmuring words of comfort. His tenderness only made her guilt more acute, but it also strengthened her resolve to be the woman he deserved. She would honor Grace's memory by building the life her sister had dreamed of. She would love Tom with all the devotion Grace would have given him, plus all the passion that was uniquely her own. December arrived with blizzards that isolated the ranch for days at a time. During these forced seclusions, Kate and Tom grew even closer, sharing stories and dreams by lamplight, while the wind howled outside their snug home. It was during one such storm that Tom made a confession that changed everything between them. "I have something to admit," he said one evening as they sat before the fire, Kate's head resting on his shoulder while he read aloud from a book of poetry. "Before you came, I was beginning to think I'd never find anyone who truly understood me. The loneliness was eating me alive, Grace. Some nights I'd sit in this very spot, and wonder if I was meant to spend my life alone." Kate lifted her head to study his profile in the firelight. "You never seemed lonely in your letters." "A man has his pride," Tom said with a self-deprecating smile. "I didn't want to sound desperate, even though I was. But you changed everything. From your very first letter, you saw something in me that I'd started to doubt existed. You made me feel worthy of love again." The irony was crushing. Grace's letters had indeed seen the best in Tom, had recognized his worth when he doubted it himself. But now Kate was the one receiving his gratitude for her sister's insight and compassion. She was living in the warmth of love that had been kindled by another woman's words. "You are worthy," she whispered, meaning it completely. "You're the best man I've ever known." Tom's smile lit up his entire face as he leaned down to kiss her forehead. Then we're a perfect match because you're the best woman I've ever known. I thank God every day for bringing you into my life. Spring arrived early that year, melting the snow and filling the creek with rushing water that sang of renewal and possibility. Kate threw herself into ranch work with an enthusiasm that surprised them both, learning to milk cows, tend chickens, and manage a vegetable garden that would feed them through the next winter. The physical labor felt cleansing somehow, as if she could work off her guilt through sweat and dedication. It was while she was hoeing weeds in the garden that trouble finally found them. Billy Crane rode up the lane with 2 other men. Kate didn't recognize, their appearance casual but their intentions clearly hostile. She straightened slowly, her hand moving instinctively to the hose handle while she called for Tom. He emerged from the barn with Frank Hartwell, both men armed and alert. Word had reached them about Billy's activities over the winter, the way he'd been pressuring smaller ranchers to sell at unfair prices, the suspicious fires that had plagued anyone who refused his offers. Tom's prosperity and obvious happiness had made him a target for Billy's jealousy and greed. "Morning, Tom," Billy called out with false cheerfulness. "Beautiful day, isn't it? Perfect weather for making new arrangements." "State your business, Billy," Tom replied coldly, positioning himself between the visitors and Kate. "You're not welcome here." Billy's smile turned predatory. "Now that's not very neighborly, especially when I come bearing such interesting news about your lovely wife." Kate's blood turned to ice in her veins. Somehow Billy had discovered something about her deception. The confident malice in his voice left no doubt that he held information he considered damaging. "I don't know what you're talking about," Tom said, but Kate could hear the uncertainty creeping into his voice. "Don't you?" Billy dismounted slowly, his companions following suit with the coordinated movement of men accustomed to violence. "See, I got curious about your bride after that little scene at the church social. Something about her just didn't sit right with me, so I did some asking around." Kate's heart hammered against her ribs as Billy reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a folded paper. Even from a distance, she could see it was a telegram, and she knew with sick certainty what it contained. "Got word from Denver about a young woman named Grace Morrison," Billy continued, his voice dripping with satisfaction. "Died of fever back in September. Buried in Riverside Cemetery on the 15th. Now that's mighty strange, considering your Grace Morrison married you on the 20th. The silence that followed felt like the moment between lightning and thunder, pregnant with approaching devastation. Kate saw the exact moment when understanding dawned in Tom's eyes, the way his face went pale beneath his tan. Frank Hartwell looked between them with growing confusion, clearly trying to process what Billy's revelation meant. "That's impossible," Tom said finally, but his voice lacked conviction. Billy's laugh was harsh and triumphant. "Is it? Take a good look at your wife, Tom. Really look at her. Does she seem like the same woman who wrote you all those sweet letters? The one who claimed to be so delicate and refined?" Kate wanted to run, to disappear into the mountains, and never face the reckoning that was bearing down on them like an avalanche. But she stood frozen in the garden, still clutching the hoe, watching her carefully constructed world crumble around her. Tom turned to face her fully, his eyes searching her face with desperate hope. "Tell him he's wrong, Grace. Tell me this is just Billy trying to cause trouble." The plea in his voice nearly destroyed her. Kate opened her mouth to deny everything, to maintain the deception that had become so much a part of her that she sometimes forgot where grace ended, and she began. But looking at Tom's beloved face, seeing the pain and confusion there, she found she couldn't add another lie to the mountain she'd already built. "I can't," she whispered. The admission hit Tom like a physical blow. He staggered backward, his face cycling through disbelief, betrayal, and a hurt so profound that Kate felt it like a knife in her own heart. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice barely audible. Kate straightened her shoulders and met his gaze directly, no longer hiding behind her sister's identity. "My name is Kate Morrison. Grace was my sister." The word came out as a croak. "She died on her way to you. Fever, just like he said. I couldn't let her dreams die with her. I thought I could honor her memory by becoming the woman she wanted to be for you." Tom's legs gave out and he sat down heavily on the porch steps, his head in his hands. Frank Hartwell moved protectively closer, his weathered face hard with anger at seeing his friend's pain. Billy Crane, meanwhile, was clearly enjoying the drama he'd orchestrated. "Now that we've cleared that up," he said with mock joviality, "I think we can discuss my original proposal. This ranch would suit my purposes perfectly, and I'm prepared to make a generous offer." The threat was clear. Billy would expose Kate's deception to the entire community, unless Tom agreed to sell. Their marriage would be revealed as a fraud, Tom would be humiliated, and Kate would likely face criminal charges for the deception. It was exactly the kind of leverage Billy had been looking for. But Tom raised his head from his hands and looked at Billy with an expression Kate had never seen before. Gone was the gentle, considerate man she'd married. In his place stood someone harder, more dangerous, shaped by betrayal into something that made Billy's companions shift nervously in their saddles. "Get off my land," Tom said quietly. Billy blinked, clearly not expecting such a response. "Now Tom, let's be reasonable. I'm offering you a way out of this embarrassment. Your marriage is based on fraud. When people find out, I said get off my land." Tom stood slowly, his hand moving to the rifle propped against the porch rail. "And if you think to spread this story around town, you'd better think again. Because if my wife's reputation suffers for your gossip, I'll hold you personally responsible." Kate stared at him in shock. Even knowing the truth, even facing the magnitude of her deception, Tom was defending her. The loyalty was more than she deserved, and more precious than gold. Billy's face darkened with frustrated rage. "You're making a mistake, Tom. A big one. The only mistake I made was not shooting you the first time you set foot on my property." Tom replied with deadly calm. "Don't give me a reason to correct that error." The standoff stretched taut as a wire for long moments before Billy finally remounted his horse. "This isn't over," he snarled. "Everyone's going to know what kind of woman you married." "Let them," Tom said simply. "I know what kind of woman she is." After Billy and his men rode away, Kate and Tom stood in the yard facing each other across a chasm of broken trust. Frank Hartwell tactfully excused himself, promising to keep watch for Billy's return, but leaving the couple to work through their crisis in private. "Why?" Tom asked finally, his voice rough with pain. "Why didn't you just tell me the truth from the beginning?" Kate set down the hoe and walked toward him slowly, afraid he might retreat if she moved too quickly. "Because I was desperate," she said honestly. "Grace died, and I had nothing left. No family, no future, no hope. But she'd found all of that with you.
Through your letters, I thought I could give her the life she'd wanted by living it for her. And me." Tom's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "What about what I wanted? Did it matter to you that I was falling in love with a lie?" The question pierced her heart like an arrow. "It wasn't all a lie," she said desperately. "My feelings for you, the way I've come to love this place, this life we've built together, that's all real. More real than anything I've ever felt." Tom studied her face for a long moment, searching for truth in features he was seeing clearly for the first time. "Who are you, really? Not Grace, not the woman I married, but you." Kate took a shaky breath, preparing to reveal herself completely for the first time since arriving in Cedar Falls. "I'm the woman who worked in factories to pay for Grace's sewing lessons, who took in laundry and scrubbed floors so she could have pretty dresses and dreams of something better. I'm practical where she was romantic, stubborn where she was gentle, stronger than she was in some ways and weaker in others." She stepped closer, close enough to see the pain in his eyes. "I'm the woman who fell in love with a man through her sister's letters, and then fell deeper in love with him in person, who would do anything to keep him safe and happy, even if it meant living a lie for the rest of her life." Tom was quiet for a long time, processing everything she'd told him. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. "I need time to think about this, about us, about what's real and what isn't." The words were like a death sentence, but Kate nodded her understanding. "I'll pack my things," she said quietly. "No." The word came out sharp and immediate. "This is your home now. Whatever else is true. I won't have you out on the road with Billy Crane making threats." Tom rubbed his face tiredly. "I'll sleep in the barn for a few days while I sort through this." Kate wanted to protest, to beg him not to punish himself for her sins, but she knew she had no right to ask for anything more than he was already giving. The fact that he wasn't throwing her out completely was more mercy than she'd dared hope for. That night, Kate lay alone in their marriage bed for the first time since their wedding, staring at the ceiling and listening to the silence where Tom's breathing should have been. The house felt cavernous without his presence, cold despite the fire still burning in the hearth. She'd gained everything she'd ever dreamed of, and lost it all in the span of a few terrible hours. The next 3 days passed in a kind of purgatory. Tom was polite but distant, speaking to her only when necessary and avoiding her eyes whenever possible. Kate threw herself into household tasks with desperate energy, cooking elaborate meals he barely touched and cleaning rooms that didn't need attention. Anything to keep her hands busy and her mind from dwelling on the growing certainty that she'd destroyed the best thing that had ever happened to her. On the 4th morning, Kate woke to find Tom sitting at the kitchen table with 2 cups of coffee, his face haggard but determined. He'd clearly been up all night thinking, and the sight of him waiting for her made her heart race with hope and terror in equal measure. "Sit down," he said quietly. "We need to talk." Kate obeyed, accepting the coffee with trembling hands. The silence stretched between them while Tom gathered his thoughts, his fingers drumming against the table in a nervous rhythm she'd never seen from him before. "I've been trying to figure out what's real and what isn't," he said finally. "The woman I fell in love with through letters, the woman I married, the woman who nursed me through fever and learned to run this ranch, the woman who cried when she told me about losing her sister. Which one of those is you?" Kate's throat tightened with emotion. "All of them," she whispered. "And none of them. I became Grace to survive, but somewhere along the way I became myself too. A version of myself I never knew existed." Tom nodded slowly, as if her answer confirmed something he'd already suspected. "The woman who sat with me while I was sick, who learned to milk cows and tend chickens, who defended this ranch while I was too weak to do it myself, that was you. Not some performance." "Yes," Kate said, hope beginning to bloom in her chest. "And the woman who looked at me like I hung the moon, who made me feel like the luckiest man alive, who turned this house into a home, that was you too." "Yes," she breathed. Tom leaned back in his chair, studying her with eyes that held more understanding than condemnation. "Then maybe what we have isn't built on as much deception as I thought. Maybe it's built on the parts of you that are real, the parts you never had a chance to show before you came here." Kate felt tears streaming down her face, but for the first time in days they weren't tears of despair. "I love you," she said, the words torn from her heart. "Not as Grace, not as anyone but myself. Whatever that means, whoever I really am, I love you more than I thought it was possible to love anyone." Tom reached across the table and took her hands in his thumb tracing over the wedding ring that had become as much a part of her as breathing. "I love you too," he said simply. "The you who's been with me these past months. The you who chose to stay and fight for this life instead of running when things got complicated." Relief flooded through Kate like a river breaking free of winter ice. "Does this mean—" "It means we start over," Tom said firmly. "Not as Tom and Grace, but as Tom and Kate. We build something real this time, based on who we actually are instead of who we thought we should be." Kate nodded eagerly, afraid to speak in case she broke the fragile hope growing between them. Tom stood and moved around the table, pulling her to her feet and into his arms. When he kissed her, it felt like coming home and starting an adventure all at the same time. "There's just one thing," Tom said against her forehead. "If we're going to do this right, we need to make it legal. Kate Morrison married Thomas Lawson, not Grace Morrison. Pastor Hayes will need to know the truth." The thought of confessing to the gentle pastor made Kate's stomach clench with anxiety, but she nodded her agreement. If they were going to build a life together based on honesty, it had to start somewhere. Pastor Hayes proved to be more understanding than Kate had dared hope. When they explained the situation in his small study behind the chapel, his kind eyes filled with compassion rather than judgment. "Grief makes us do desperate things sometimes," he said gently. "The important thing is that you found your way to truth and genuine love." He agreed to perform a quiet ceremony that would legally bind Kate Morrison to Thomas Lawson, with only Frank Hartwell and Margaret Hayes as witnesses. It wasn't the grand celebration their first wedding had been, but it felt infinitely more sacred. These vows were spoken by two people who knew exactly who they were promising to love and cherish. Billy Crane made good on his threat to spread the story of Kate's deception around town, but the reaction wasn't what he'd expected. Instead of scandal and ostracism, the community rallied around Tom and Kate with protective loyalty. Margaret Hayes organized a new quilting circle that pointedly excluded anyone who gossiped about the situation. Ruth Caldwell made it clear that anyone spreading malicious stories would find themselves unwelcome at her trading post. Even Doc Mitchell offered his opinion that a woman who'd nursed a man through fever and learned to run a ranch clearly had the right priorities, regardless of her name. By summer, Billy Crane had moved on to easier targets, his attempts to destroy Kate and Tom's happiness having only strengthened their bond with the community. The ranch prospered under their joint management, Kate's practical skills complementing Tom's knowledge of the land in ways that surprised them both. One evening in late July, they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and rose. Kate's hand rested on the gentle swell of her belly, where their first child grew, a future neither Grace nor Kate Morrison could have imagined when this journey began. "Do you ever regret it?" Tom asked, his arm tightening around her shoulders. "Everything you went through to get here." Kate considered the question seriously, thinking of all the pain and fear and guilt that had brought her to this moment. "I regret the deception," she said finally. "I regret that Grace never got to see this place, never got to know the man she fell in love with through letters. But I can't regret the path that led me to you." Tom kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her hair. "I used to think I knew exactly what I wanted in a wife," he mused. "Someone gentle and refined, domestic and agreeable. Grace Morrison would have been perfect for me." "And now?" Kate asked, though she thought she knew the answer. "Now I know I needed someone stronger, someone who could match me step for step and challenge me to be better, someone who could turn a house into a home and a dream into reality." He pulled back to look at her directly. "I needed Kate Morrison, even if I was too stupid to know it at the time." Kate smiled, feeling the last of her guilt finally release its hold on her heart. She'd stolen a dead woman's identity and used it to claim a life that was never meant to be hers. But somehow through love and determination and the grace of a man who saw worth in her that she'd never recognized herself, she'd transformed theft into truth. The mountains stood eternal around their small piece of paradise, witnesses to the unlikely love story that had grown from deception into something pure and lasting. In the distance, a train whistle echoed through the valley, carrying new dreams and new dreamers toward uncertain futures. Kate Morrison Lawson listened to that sound with contentment, rather than longing, knowing she'd already found everything she'd never dared hope for. She was home. 2 years had passed since the day Billy Crane rode onto their property with his poisonous revelations, and Kate could hardly recognize the woman she'd been in those desperate first months. The ranch had flourished under their combined efforts, expanding to include a prize-winning herd of cattle and vegetable gardens that supplied half of Cedar Falls through the growing season. More importantly, their marriage had deepened into something that felt unshakable, built on a foundation of honesty that had been tested by fire, and emerged stronger than steel. The morning Kate felt the first unmistakable pangs of labor. Autumn was painting the Colorado landscape in brilliant shades that seemed to celebrate the life about to enter the world. Tom had been up since before dawn, pacing the kitchen like a caged wolf while Kate tried to maintain her composure between increasingly frequent contractions. "You should fetch Doc Mitchell now," she said, gripping the back of a chair as another wave of pain rolled through her. "And Margaret Hayes. She promised to be here when the time came." Tom's face went pale beneath his tan. "Are you sure? Maybe it's just false labor. Maybe we should wait a little longer." Kate would have laughed if she hadn't been concentrating on breathing through the contraction. Here was a man who could face down armed troublemakers and wrestle ornery cattle without flinching, reduced to nervous stammers by the prospect of childbirth. "Thomas Lawson, if you don't get on that horse right now, you're going to be delivering this baby yourself." That got him moving. Within minutes, Tom was thundering down the lane toward town while Kate focused on the monumental task of bringing their child safely into the world. She'd helped with births before back in St. Louis when neighbors needed assistance, but experiencing labor herself was entirely different. Each contraction felt like her body was being turned inside out, yet beneath the pain was an excitement that made her heart race with anticipation. By the time Tom returned with Doc Mitchell and Margaret Hayes, Kate had progressed enough that the older woman took one look at her, and immediately began organizing the bedroom for delivery. Margaret had assisted with dozens of births over the years, her calm efficiency a stark contrast to Tom's barely controlled panic. First babies usually take their time, Margaret assured them both, though Kate noticed she was moving with purpose as she arranged towels and boiled water. But this little one seems eager to meet the world. Doc Mitchell proved to be exactly the steady presence they needed, his gentle examination confirming that things were progressing normally if quickly. Strong, healthy mother, he pronounced with satisfaction. Everything looks perfect. Tom, why don't you help Frank with the evening chores while we handle things here? Frank Hartwell had arrived shortly after the doctor, bringing his wife Ellen to assist with the birth. The older couple had become like family over the past 2 years, Frank serving as Tom's unofficial foreman, while Ellen provided the maternal wisdom Kate sometimes desperately missed. Having them present for this momentous occasion felt exactly right. I'm not leaving, Tom said firmly, taking Kate's hand in his work-roughened grip. She needs me here. Kate squeezed his fingers gratefully, touched by his determination to share this experience, despite his obvious discomfort with the medical realities of childbirth. Grace might have preferred him to wait elsewhere, maintaining the delicate sensibilities expected of frontier wives, but Kate wanted her husband beside her for every moment of their child's arrival. The afternoon progressed in waves of increasing intensity, with Kate focusing all her strength on the task at hand while Tom provided steady encouragement and cool cloths for her fevered brow. Margaret and Ellen worked together with the smooth coordination of women who understood the sacred nature of birth, while Doc Mitchell monitored Kate's progress with professional concern. As the sun began to set behind the mountains, casting long shadows across their bedroom, Kate felt the final overwhelming urge to push. Everything she'd endured over the past 2 years, the deception and revelation, the fear and hope, the gradual building of trust and love, had led to this moment when she would become someone entirely new. A mother. I can see the head, Doc Mitchell announced with quiet excitement. One more good push should do it. Kate bore down with every ounce of strength she possessed, Tom's voice in her ear urging her on, Margaret's hands supporting her back, Ellen's prayers whispered in the corner like a benediction. Then suddenly, incredibly, their child slipped into the world with a lusty cry that filled the room with indescribable joy. A daughter, Doc Mitchell said, his weathered face creased in a smile as he cleaned and examined the baby. Perfect in every way. Tom's tears fell freely as he looked at their daughter for the first time, his strong hands trembling as he reached out to touch her tiny fist. She's beautiful, he whispered in awe. Absolutely perfect. Kate felt her heart expand beyond what seemed physically possible as Doc Mitchell placed their daughter in her arms. The baby was indeed perfect, with wisps of dark hair and slate blue eyes that seemed to look right through to Kate's soul. Every sacrifice, every moment of guilt and fear, every difficult choice that had brought her to this point, suddenly felt worthwhile beyond measure. What will you name her? Margaret asked softly, settling beside the bed with the gentle reverence appropriate to witnessing a miracle. Kate and Tom exchanged a look that held entire conversation. They'd discussed names for months, debating options that honored their families while giving their child her own identity. But looking at their daughter's perfect face, Kate knew there was only one name that felt right. Grace, she said quietly. Grace Ellen Lawson. Tom's eyes filled with fresh tears as he understood the significance of her choice. After all the pain and guilt surrounding her sister's death, Kate was choosing to honor Grace's memory in the most beautiful way possible. Their daughter would carry her aunt's name as a blessing, not a burden. Ellen Hartwell wiped her own eyes at being included in the baby's naming, while Margaret nodded approval of the choice.
Doc Mitchell completed his examination with satisfaction, pronouncing both mother and child in excellent health. As the household settled into the quiet reverence that followed birth, Kate marveled at the profound transformation she felt. She was no longer Kate Morrison pretending to be Grace Morrison pretending to be Grace Lawson. She was simply Kate Lawson, wife to Tom and mother to Grace Ellen, a woman who had finally found her true identity through love rather than deception. The next weeks passed in the blissful exhaustion unique to new parents. Tom proved to be a devoted father, rising for middle-of-the-night feedings, and changing diapers with the same careful attention he brought to caring for young calves. Kate had worried that her own childhood, marked by loss and hardship, hadn't prepared her for motherhood, but she found that love made up for any lack of experience. News of Grace Ellen's birth spread quickly through Cedar Falls, bringing a steady stream of visitors bearing gifts and congratulations. Sarah Thompson arrived with tiny dresses her twins had outgrown, sharing stories about the challenges and joys of raising children on isolated ranches. Ruth Caldwell brought a hand-carved cradle that had been in her family for 3 generations, her usual sharp demeanor softened by the sight of the peacefully sleeping baby. Most surprisingly, Pastor Hayes and his wife arrived with an unexpected proposal. "We've been discussing the idea of starting a proper school in Cedar Falls," Margaret explained as she admired little Grace. "The town's growing, and we have enough children now to justify hiring a teacher. We were wondering if you might be interested in the position." Kate looked up from nursing her daughter, startled by the suggestion. "Me? But I'm not qualified to teach school." "You can read and write beautifully," Pastor Hayes said with a gentle smile. "You've helped several families with their correspondence, and everyone speaks highly of your patience with the children. More importantly, you understand what it's like to want something better for yourself, to reach for opportunities that might seem out of reach." The offer was tempting in ways Kate hadn't expected. Teaching would allow her to contribute to the community's growth while staying close to home and her growing family. It would also give her a chance to help other young people avoid some of the desperate choices that had once seemed like her only options. "I'd need to wait until Grace is older," Kate said carefully. "I won't leave her while she's still nursing." "Of course," Margaret agreed immediately. "We were thinking of starting next fall, when she'll be nearly a year old. That would give you time to prepare and us time to build a proper schoolhouse." Tom's expression showed his pride in the community's recognition of his wife's capabilities. "Whatever Kate decides is fine with me," he said, bouncing their daughter gently in his arms. "Though I suspect she'd make an excellent teacher." The idea took root in Kate's mind over the following weeks, growing stronger as she considered the possibilities. Teaching would be a way to honor the education Grace had sacrificed for, using knowledge to help others the way her sister had once helped her. It felt like another step in the long journey of becoming the woman she was truly meant to be. Winter settled over the ranch with unusual mildness, allowing for more visitors and social gatherings than previous years. Kate found herself at the center of the community's social life in ways she'd never experienced, her home becoming a natural gathering place for the women of Cedar Falls. The reputation for Kate's coffee and Ellen Hartwell's assistance with household management drew steady streams of neighbors seeking advice, companionship, or simply a warm place to visit. It was during one such gathering in February that Ruth Caldwell brought news that changed everything once again. "Billy Crane's been arrested," she announced without preamble, settling into her usual chair by the fire while Grace Ellen gurgled contentedly in Kate's arms. The room fell silent as everyone processed this unexpected development. Billy had left Cedar Falls the previous spring, after his attempts to intimidate local ranchers had backfired spectacularly. But his reputation for causing trouble had apparently followed him to his next destination. "Arrested for what?" Sarah Thompson asked, bouncing her youngest son to keep him quiet. "Fraud and theft according to the telegram from Denver," Ruth replied with satisfaction. "Apparently he tried to sell some land he didn't actually own to a group of investors from back east. When they discovered the deception and demanded their money back, things got ugly. He's looking at several years in territorial prison. Kate felt a complicated mix of relief and vindication at this news. Billy's attempts to destroy her marriage had failed so completely that she'd almost forgotten the threat he'd once represented. Knowing he was finally facing consequences for his behavior brought a sense of closure to that difficult chapter of their lives. Good riddance, Margaret Hayes said firmly. Men like that always get what's coming to them eventually. The conversation moved on to other topics, but Kate found herself reflecting on the strange justice of Billy's downfall. He tried to destroy her life by exposing her deception, never realizing that truth and honesty would ultimately make her marriage stronger rather than weaker. Meanwhile, his own dishonest schemes had finally caught up with him in the worst possible way. Spring brought with it the excitement of planning Cedar Falls' first proper school. The townspeople had rallied behind the project with enthusiasm, donating money, materials, and labor to build a modest but functional schoolhouse on the edge of town. Kate threw herself into preparations with the same dedication she'd once brought to learning ranch life, studying teaching methods and organizing curriculum that would serve children of varying ages and abilities. Tom supported her new venture with the same quiet pride he'd shown throughout their marriage. He helped her practice lessons in their kitchen while Grace Ellen played at their feet, offering suggestions and encouragement that revealed his own sharp intelligence. Kate had always known her husband was smart, but watching him help plan educational strategies for the community's children showed her new depths to the man she'd married. The school opened in September with 12 students ranging in age from 6 to 14. Kate discovered that teaching came naturally to her, drawing on the same patience and determination that had helped her master ranch life. The older students helped with the younger ones, creating a family atmosphere that reminded Kate of the close-knit community that had welcomed her so generously. Grace Ellen proved to be the school's unofficial mascot, spending her days playing quietly in a corner of the classroom while Kate conducted lessons. The other children doted on her, and Kate was touched by their gentle care for the baby who would someday join their ranks as a student. By Christmas, the school had become such a success that neighboring communities were sending delegations to study Cedar Falls' educational methods. Kate found herself corresponding with teachers across the territory, sharing ideas and resources that helped improve education throughout the region. The work gave her a sense of purpose that complemented rather than competed with her roles as wife and mother. It was during the school's Christmas program that Kate experienced perhaps the most profound moment of her entire journey. As she watched her students perform songs and recitations for their proud families, little Grace Ellen babbling happily in Tom's arms, she suddenly saw her life with perfect clarity. She was no longer the desperate woman who'd stolen her sister's identity out of fear and loneliness. She wasn't even the guilty imposter who'd struggled to deserve the love she'd claimed through deception. She was Kate Lawson, teacher and mother, wife and community member, a woman who'd found her true calling through the most unlikely circumstances imaginable. After the program ended and the families had gone home, Kate stood in the empty schoolhouse straightening chairs and collecting the children's artwork. Tom appeared in the doorway with Grace Ellen asleep against his shoulder, his expression soft with contentment. "Proud of you," he said simply, settling beside her on one of the student benches. "Grace would be proud too, I think." Kate's eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of gratitude rather than grief. "I hope so. I hope she would understand why I made the choices I did." How could she not? Tom shifted Grace Ellen to his other arm and pulled Kate close with his free hand. "You've built a life she would have loved in a place she dreamed of calling home. You've honored her memory in ways that matter more than names or circumstances." Looking around the schoolhouse that bore testament to her hard work and dedication, Kate finally felt the last vestiges of guilt release their hold on her heart. Grace's dreams had indeed come true, just not in the way anyone could have predicted. Through Kate's love and determination, her sister's vision of life in the Colorado Territory had become reality. Outside, snow began to fall in the gentle, steady way that promised a white Christmas. The mountains stood guard over their small community, eternal and protective. while the lights of home beckoned families back to warm hearths and loving embraces. Kate Lawson gathered her things and prepared to head home with her husband and daughter, no longer running from her past or hiding from her future. She was exactly where she belonged, exactly who she was meant to be, surrounded by love that had grown from the most unlikely seed imaginable. The woman who had once stolen a dead sister's identity had finally found her own, and it was more beautiful than anything she could have imagined when she stepped off that train in Cedar Falls all those years ago. Grace Ellen stirred in Tom's arms, making the soft sounds that meant she would wake soon, wanting to nurse, and Kate smiled at the perfect simplicity of being needed, being loved, being home. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, new students to teach and new dreams to pursue. But tonight she was complete in ways that had nothing to do with deception and everything to do with the courage to love and be loved authentically. The mountains whispered their ancient promises of permanence and protection, and Kate Lawson listened with the contentment of a woman who had finally found her place in the world. In the distance, a train whistle echoed through the valley, carrying its load of hopes and dreamers toward uncertain destinations. Kate heard that sound with compassion rather than envy, understanding now that the most important journeys weren't always the ones that took you somewhere new. Sometimes the greatest adventure was discovering who you really were in the place you already belonged. She was home, she was loved, and she was finally completely herself. Grace Morrison's dreams had found their perfect fulfillment in Kate Lawson's authentic life, and that was the most beautiful ending to any story she could imagine. 5 years had transformed Cedar Falls from a rough frontier settlement into a thriving community, and Kate Lawson stood at the heart of that transformation. The schoolhouse she'd helped establish had grown into a proper academy, drawing students from neighboring counties who boarded with local families during the school year. What had
begun as a simple one-room education had evolved into something that rivaled the finest institutions in Denver, all under Kate's patient guidance. This particular morning found her standing before the schoolhouse mirror, adjusting the collar of her finest dress while her reflection showed a woman she barely recognized from those desperate days in St. Louis. At 31, Kate had grown into her role as the territory's most respected educator, her face bearing the confidence that came from knowing her true worth. The frightened imposter who'd once trembled at every question had been replaced by someone who commanded respect through competence and compassion. Grace Ellen, now a precocious 5-year-old with her father's steady temperament and her mother's quick mind, sat at Kate's desk practicing her letters with the serious concentration of a child who understood education's value. Tom's younger brother had arrived from Ireland the previous spring, bringing news of family and old country customs that delighted Grace Ellen to no end. Uncle Patrick's tales of leprechauns and ancient castles provided endless entertainment for the little girl who'd never known anything but Colorado's vast horizons. "Mama, why are you wearing your Sunday dress on a Wednesday?" Grace Ellen asked without looking up from her careful lettering. Her daughter had inherited more than Tom's calm demeanor. She possessed an observational skill that sometimes unnerved adults who weren't prepared for such directness from a child. Kate smoothed her skirts nervously, aware that today would bring visitors whose opinion mattered more than she cared to admit. "Because we're expecting important guests, sweetheart. Representatives from the territorial government who want to see what we've accomplished here." The truth was more complex and personally significant than Kate revealed to her daughter. Word of Cedar Falls' educational success had reached the territorial capital, where officials were considering Kate's innovative teaching methods as a model for schools throughout Colorado. If today's visit went well, she might be offered a position that would take her family to Denver, providing opportunities she'd never dared dream of, but also requiring them to leave the only home Grace Ellen had ever known. Tom entered the schoolhouse carrying the morning's mail, his face grave with concern as he sorted through the official-looking envelopes. Marriage had added distinguished silver to his temples and deepened the laugh lines around his eyes, but it had also given him an understanding of his wife's moods that sometimes seemed almost supernatural. "Second thoughts?" he asked quietly, setting the mail aside and moving to stand behind her chair. His hands settled on her shoulders with the easy intimacy of a man who'd learned to read his wife's tensions and fears. Kate leaned back against his solid presence, drawing strength from his unwavering support. Not about the opportunity itself, but about what it would mean for Grace Ellen, for our life here. This community raised her, Tom. These people are her family as much as we are. Through the schoolhouse windows, Kate could see the bustling main street that had grown to include a proper bank, a telegraph office, and even a small hotel for the increasing number of visitors drawn by the town's reputation. Frank and Ellen Hartwell had opened a restaurant that served travelers and locals alike, while Ruth Caldwell's trading post had expanded into a general store that supplied half the county. Tom followed her gaze, understanding the complex emotions behind her hesitation. Growth changes things, he agreed, but it doesn't have to change what matters most. We've built something here that goes beyond buildings and businesses. Before Kate could respond, the sound of approaching horses announced the arrival of their distinguished visitors. 3 men in formal city attire dismounted from a hired wagon, their careful movements suggesting long travel and unfamiliarity with frontier conditions. Kate recognized the lead figure from his photograph in Denver newspapers. Territorial Education Commissioner James Whitmore, a man whose decisions would shape Colorado's educational future for decades to come. Grace Ellen immediately stopped her letter practice and moved to stand beside her parents, her natural curiosity overcoming any shyness about meeting strangers. Kate felt a surge of maternal pride at her daughter's poised bearing, the way she assessed the visitors with intelligent eyes while maintaining the respectful demeanor Kate had worked so hard to instill. "Mrs. Lawson," Commissioner Whitmore said, removing his hat with old-fashioned courtesy as he approached the schoolhouse steps. "I'm James Whitmore, and these are my associates, Mr. Harrison and Mr. Bennett. We've traveled quite a distance to see what you've accomplished here." Kate accepted his introduction with the confidence she'd earned through years of proving herself to skeptical parents and visiting officials. "Welcome to Cedar Falls, Commissioner. I trust your journey wasn't too taxing. Mountain travel can be challenging for those unaccustomed to the altitude." Whitmore's slight smile suggested he appreciated both her courtesy and her subtle reminder that she understood the effort required to reach their remote community. "Worth every mile if the reports we've received are accurate. Your student achievement scores are remarkable for such a rural location." The formal tour began with Kate's current class of 18 students, ranging from 6-year-old beginners to advanced pupils nearly ready for college-level work. She'd organized the day to showcase not just academic achievement but the practical skills that prepared her students for success in Colorado's challenging environment. Mathematics lessons incorporated ranch management and business accounting, while literature studies included works that addressed frontier themes and moral development. Commissioner Whitmore proved to be more than a bureaucratic observer. His questions revealed genuine understanding of educational theory and sincere interest in methods that achieved results. He spent considerable time observing Kate's approach to mixed-age instruction, her integration of practical and academic subjects, and most importantly, her ability to inspire confidence in students who might otherwise assume higher education was beyond their reach. "Remarkable," he murmured as he watched 14-year-old Samuel Morrison solve complex algebraic equations while simultaneously helping younger students with their arithmetic. "How do you manage such diverse skill levels without losing either the advanced or struggling students?" Kate's explanation revealed the philosophy she'd developed through years of trial and refinement. Every child has something valuable to contribute and something important to learn. The older students reinforce their own knowledge by teaching younger ones, while beginners see what they can achieve with effort and time. No one succeeds alone and no one fails without support. During the lunch break, Commissioner Whitmore had the opportunity to speak privately with several community members who gathered to meet the distinguished visitors. Pastor Hayes spoke eloquently about Kate's contributions to the community beyond education, her role in organizing charitable efforts, and her gentle counseling of families facing difficulties. Ruth Caldwell, never one to mince words, declared flatly that Kate Lawson was the best thing that had ever happened to Cedar Falls, and anyone who couldn't see that was a fool. Most touching was the testimony of Sarah Thompson, whose twin boys had struggled academically until Kate's patient intervention transformed them into confident students. Mrs. Lawson saw potential where others saw problems. Sarah explained, her voice thick with gratitude. She never gave up on them, never made them feel stupid or hopeless. Now they're both planning to attend the Territorial University. Tom remained quietly supportive throughout the day, his presence providing Kate with the security to take risks and showcase her most innovative methods. When Commissioner Whitmore expressed skepticism about allowing students to pursue independent research projects, Tom quietly mentioned his wife's success rate in preparing young people for higher education despite their rural backgrounds. As the afternoon progressed, Kate found herself genuinely excited about the possibilities these visitors represented. The chance to influence educational policy across the territory, to share methods that could help children in distant communities achieve their potential, appealed to the part of her that had always wanted to make a broader difference in the world. But it was Grace Ellen who provided the day's most memorable moment. When Commissioner Whitmore asked what she enjoyed most about school, the 5-year-old considered the question with the seriousness of a philosopher before responding. "I like that Mama teaches us that being smart isn't enough. You have to be kind and helpful too, or being smart doesn't matter very much." The simple wisdom of her daughter's words brought tears to Kate's eyes and visible emotion to Commissioner Whitmore's usually composed features. Here was proof that education's highest purpose wasn't just academic achievement but character development, the creation of citizens who would contribute positively to their communities. After the visitors departed with promises to contact Kate within the week regarding their decision, she found herself alone in the schoolhouse with Tom and Grace Ellen as the sun set behind the mountains. The familiar ritual of cleaning up after a school day felt particularly poignant this evening, weighted with the possibility that such moments might soon become memories rather than daily experiences. "What do you think they'll offer?" Tom asked as he helped stack chairs and sweep floors, the domestic partnership that had sustained them through years of challenges and changes. Kate paused in her wiping of the blackboard, considering possibilities she'd barely dared imagine. If the rumors are true, they're looking for someone to head a new territorial teacher training program. Based in Denver, responsible for developing curriculum standards and training methods for rural schools throughout Colorado. The magnitude of such an opportunity was almost overwhelming. Kate would be influencing education across hundreds of communities, helping ensure that children in remote areas received the same quality instruction available in established cities. It was the kind of position that could shape an entire generation's educational experience. Grace Ellen looked up from the book she'd been reading in the corner, her young face serious with the weight of adult conversations she didn't fully understand but sensed were important. "Would we have to leave here, Mama? Leave Uncle Patrick and Grandmama Ellen and all our friends?" The question pierced Kate's heart with its innocent directness. How could she explain that sometimes achieving your dreams required sacrificing other precious things? That growth and opportunity often demanded difficult choices between competing goods rather than simple selections between right and wrong. Tom knelt beside his daughter's chair, his voice gentle but honest. "Sometimes families have to make big decisions about where they live and what work they do. But no matter where we go, we'll always be together, and we'll never forget the people who've been important to us." Kate watched this exchange with the deep love that had grown between them over the years. Tom's patience with their daughter's questions and Grace Ellen's trust in her parents' wisdom. Whatever decision they made would affect all three of them, but it would be made together, with full consideration of everyone's needs and dreams. That evening, after Grace Ellen had been tucked into bed with her favorite story and a kiss goodnight, Kate and Tom sat on their front porch watching stars emerge in the clear mountain sky. The ranch had prospered alongside Kate's teaching career, their cattle operation now supplying beef to mining camps throughout the region, while Tom's reputation for fair dealing had made him a natural leader in local business matters. "Part of me is terrified by the opportunity," Kate admitted, her hand finding Tom's in the darkness between their rocking chairs. "What if I'm not qualified for something so important? What if I fail and disappoint everyone who believed in me?" Tom's laugh was warm with affection and confidence. The woman who turned Cedar Falls' one-room schoolhouse into a territorial model of education. The woman who've helped dozens of children achieve more than they ever thought possible. "Kate, you've already proven you can succeed at anything you set your mind to."
His faith in her abilities was both comforting and challenging, pushing Kate to consider possibilities she might otherwise dismiss as beyond her reach. But beneath the professional opportunity lay deeper questions about identity and purpose that went to the heart of who she'd become over these years in Colorado. "Sometimes I wonder what Grace would think of all this," Kate said quietly, voicing thoughts she rarely shared even with Tom. "Whether she would approve of the direction my life has taken, the choices I've made in her name." Tom was quiet for a long moment, considering words that would honor both sisters' memories while acknowledging the complex reality of their situation. "I think Grace would be amazed by what you've accomplished. Not just the teaching and community involvement, but the way you've raised our daughter, the way you've made this place a home for so many people." Kate felt tears prick her eyes as she considered his words, remembering the frightened, desperate woman who'd stepped off the train in Cedar Falls 6 years ago. That woman had been running from loss and failure, seeking only survival and basic security. She could never have imagined the opportunities and responsibilities that now lay before her. A week later, the letter arrived that would determine their family's future. Commissioner Whitmore's formal offer exceeded even Kate's optimistic expectations. Director of Rural Education Development for the Colorado Territory, with authority to establish training programs, develop curriculum standards, and oversee the expansion of quality education to underserved communities throughout the region. The position came with a substantial salary, a house in Denver's most desirable residential district, and the kind of professional recognition that would establish Kate as one of the territory's most influential educators. It was everything the woman in her position could hope to achieve, the culmination of years of hard work and dedication. But it also meant leaving Cedar Falls, the community that had nurtured her growth from imposter to authentic leader. It meant uprooting Grace Ellen from the only home she'd ever known, separating her from the extended family of neighbors and friends who'd helped shape her character. It meant Tom would have to sell or lease the ranch that had been his family's legacy, adapting his skills to an urban environment that might not fully appreciate his unique talents. The family council that evening was conducted with the seriousness such a momentous decision deserved. Grace Ellen, now old enough to understand the implications, listened quietly as her parents explained the opportunity and its requirements. Her questions revealed a maturity beyond her years, a thoughtful consideration of how the change would affect everyone she cared about. "Would I still be able to learn from you, Mama?" she asked with the directness that never failed to cut to the heart of any issue. "Or would you be too busy with important work to teach me things?" Kate's heart clenched at the fear beneath her daughter's carefully controlled question. "Sweetheart, you will always be the most important student I could ever have. No job, no matter how important, would ever change that." Tom's contribution to the discussion revealed the depth of his love and support for Kate's ambitions. "Your mother has a chance to help children all over Colorado receive better education. It's the kind of opportunity that comes once in a lifetime, and she's earned it through years of dedicated work." The decision, when it came, felt both inevitable and terrifying. Kate would accept the position, but with conditions that reflected their family's values and priorities. She would spend 3 months each year traveling to rural communities, working directly with local teachers and students rather than simply issuing directives from Denver. Grace Ellen would accompany her whenever possible, learning about different communities and educational approaches, while maintaining close contact with her mother's work. Most importantly, they would keep the ranch as a retreat and eventual retirement home, ensuring their connection to Cedar Falls and the community that had given them so much remained strong. Tom would divide his time between supporting Kate's work and maintaining their Colorado roots, providing stability for their family, while adapting to new challenges and opportunities. The farewell celebration organized by Cedar Falls exceeded anything Kate had imagined possible. The entire community gathered in the schoolhouse she'd helped transform, sharing memories, and expressing gratitude for the changes she'd brought to their lives. Students who'd moved on to higher education returned to honor the teacher who'd made their achievements possible, while parents spoke eloquently about the confidence and skills their children had gained under Kate's guidance. Ruth Caldwell, never one for sentimental speeches, simply handed Kate a leather portfolio, containing letters of recommendation from every family she'd taught. "Take these with you," she said gruffly. "Remind those city folks exactly what kind of teacher they're getting." Pastor Hayes offered a blessing that brought tears to every eye, thanking God for sending Kate to their community when she was most needed and asking for continued protection and success in her new endeavors. His words emphasized not just her professional achievements, but her character, the integrity and compassion that had made her such an effective teacher and beloved community member. As the evening wound down and neighbors began the journey home, Kate found herself standing once again in the empty schoolhouse where she'd discovered her true calling. The room held memories of countless lessons taught and learned, of young minds challenged and encouraged, of a community's children prepared for futures their parents had never dared imagine possible. Tom appeared beside her, Grace Ellen sleeping peacefully in his arms after the excitement of the evening's festivities. His presence provided the anchor it had always offered, steady support that allowed her to take risks and pursue dreams that might otherwise have seemed impossible. "Ready for the next adventure?" he asked softly, his voice holding both excitement and the natural apprehension that accompanied major life changes. Kate took one last look around the schoolhouse, then turned toward her husband and daughter with the confidence that had carried her through every challenge of their life together. "As ready as anyone can be for something completely unknown, but we'll figure it out as we go, the way we always have." The train that would carry them to Denver and their new life arrived with the dawn, its whistle echoing off the mountains like a herald of change and possibility. As Kate settled into her seat with Grace Ellen curled beside her and Tom across the aisle organizing their travel documents, she reflected on the incredible journey that had brought them to this moment. 6 years ago, she'd been a desperate woman fleeing from loss and failure, seeking only survival in a hostile world. Now she was embarking on a new adventure as a recognized professional, surrounded by family, and supported by a community that would always welcome her home. The transformation seemed almost magical, but Kate knew it had been built through years of hard work, honest communication, and the gradual accumulation of trust and competence. As the train pulled away from Cedar Falls station, Kate pressed her face to the window for one last glimpse of the place that had made her who she was. The mountains stood eternal and protective, witnesses to all the struggles and triumphs that had shaped her family's life. The ranch house sat peacefully in its valley, waiting for their eventual return. The schoolhouse caught the morning light like a beacon, ready to continue its educational mission under new leadership. Grace Ellen stirred in her sleep, murmuring something about lessons and friends before settling back into peaceful dreams. Tom reached across the aisle to squeeze Kate's hand, his touch conveying love, support and excitement for whatever lay ahead. Outside the window, Colorado's magnificent landscape rolled past, each mile carrying them toward new challenges and opportunities, while the foundation of their love and commitment remained unshakable. Kate Lawson closed her eyes and let the train's rhythm lull her toward rest, confident that whatever the future held, she would meet it as herself, authentically and completely, surrounded by love and guided by the hard-won wisdom of a woman who had finally found her true place in the world. 10 years had passed since Kate Lawson first stepped onto that Denver platform as the newly appointed Director of Rural Education Development. The nervous woman who'd worried about leaving Cedar Falls had evolved into a confident administrator whose influence shaped educational policy across 3 territories. Her innovative programs had transformed hundreds of one-room schoolhouses into thriving centers of learning, while her teacher training institutes had become models copied throughout the American West. Grace Ellen, now 15 and possessed of her mother's sharp intellect, tempered by her father's steady wisdom, sat in the parlor of their Denver mansion reading correspondence from former students who'd gone on to universities back east. Her proud smile as she shared news of academic achievements and career successes revealed the deep satisfaction she took in being part of her mother's educational legacy. Tom had adapted to city life with the same quiet competence he brought to every challenge, establishing himself as a respected livestock consultant while maintaining their beloved ranch as a summer retreat. The walls of their Denver home displayed awards and commendations Kate had received, but the most treasured items remained the simple photographs and letters from rural communities, whose children now had opportunities their parents had never imagined possible. This particular afternoon found Kate preparing for what would be her final public address as director, a retirement ceremony that had drawn educators and politicians from across the nation. At 41, she was stepping down from official duties to pursue a different kind of teaching, one that would allow her to spend more time with her family while continuing to influence education through writing and private consultation. The speech she'd prepared for tonight's ceremony contained reflections on a career that had exceeded every dream she'd dared harbor during those desperate early days in Colorado. But as she reviewed her notes, Kate found herself thinking not of professional achievements but of the personal journey that had made them possible. The frightened woman who'd stolen her sister's identity had discovered something infinitely more valuable than security. She'd found her authentic self. Grace Ellen looked up from her reading, her perceptive gaze studying her mother's thoughtful expression. Nervous about tonight, she asked with the gentle concern that had characterized her since childhood. Kate smiled at her daughter's intuitive understanding. Not nervous exactly, more like reflective. It's strange to think that tomorrow I'll wake up as just Kate Lawson instead of Director Kate Lawson. You'll always be the woman who changed everything for thousands of children, Grace Ellen replied with the quiet confidence that never failed to amaze Kate. That doesn't end just because you're not using an official title anymore. The doorbell's chime announced Tom's return from his final business meeting, and Kate heard his familiar footsteps approaching the parlor. He appeared in the doorway still wearing his traveling clothes, but his face held the contentment that had marked their marriage since those early days of learning to trust each other completely. Ready to go home? He asked, settling into his favorite chair with the ease of a man who'd found peace in unexpected places. Kate nodded, understanding that home meant the ranch where they'd first built their life together. The place where Grace Ellen had taken her first steps and where Kate had discovered the courage to become who she was truly meant to be. Tomorrow they would begin the journey back to Cedar Falls, not as refugees from their past, but as successful people choosing to return to their roots. That evening's ceremony proved to be everything Kate had hoped and more. Colleagues spoke eloquently about her innovations and achievements, while former students offered testimonials that brought tears to every eye in the audience. But it was Tom's brief remarks that captured the heart of her transformation. Standing at the podium with the quiet dignity that had first attracted her to him, he spoke not of professional accomplishments but of character, courage, and the rare gift of inspiring others to exceed their own expectations. As the applause faded and the evening wound down, Kate stood at the edge of the crowded reception hall watching the people whose lives had intersected with hers over these remarkable years. Educators she'd mentored were now training the next generation of teachers. Students from remote communities had become doctors, lawyers, and business leaders. The ripple effects of her work would continue long after her official retirement, touching lives she would never know in ways she could never measure. Grace Ellen appeared at her side, no longer the 5-year-old who'd once practiced letters at her mother's desk, but a young woman preparing for her own journey to university back east. Her pride in her mother's achievements was evident, but so was her understanding that the real measure of success lay not in recognition or titles, but in the lives changed and the love shared. "I'm proud of you, Mama," Grace Ellen said simply, her words carrying the weight of absolute sincerity. Kate felt her eyes fill with tears at her daughter's affirmation, remembering the terrified woman who'd once wondered if she could ever be worthy of the love she'd claimed through deception. The answer had come through years of growth, service, and the gradual understanding that worthiness wasn't something to be earned but something to be discovered and nurtured in ourselves and others. As they prepared to leave Denver behind and return to the mountains that had witnessed every stage of her transformation, Kate realized that the circle of her journey was finally complete. She'd begun as Kate Morrison, a desperate woman fleeing from loss. She'd become Grace Morrison through necessity and fear. She'd evolved into Grace Lawson through love and commitment. And now finally, she was simply Kate Lawson, a woman who had learned that the most profound truth of any life is not where it begins but how authentically it unfolds. The train that would carry them home departed at dawn, its whistle echoing through the Denver Valley like a song of completion. As Colorado's familiar landscape rolled past the windows, Kate reflected on the extraordinary path that had led her from that first desperate deception to this moment of peaceful resolution. Grace Ellen dozed against her shoulder, dreaming perhaps of her own future adventures, while Tom worked quietly on plans for expanding their ranch operations. The mountains rose ahead of them, eternal and welcoming, promising the peace that comes from returning to the place where you first discovered who you were truly meant to be. Kate Lawson closed her eyes and let the rhythm of the rails carry her toward home, toward the life she'd built through courage, love, and the revolutionary understanding that sometimes we must lose ourselves completely before we can find who we were always meant to become. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.